right, we're going to call the meeting to order, being 6 o'clock. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Call the roll, please, Bob.
Alex Vedvik,
Here.
Kelly Coyle,
Here.
Aaron Mishka,
Here.
Chris Bowl,
Here.
Chris Iden,
Here.
Ken Charneski.
Here. All right. Item number 2, announcement of closed session later on in the agenda. Item number 3, public comment. Thank you. All right, first up is an email from Dan Kindleberger.
Dan Kindleberger, 1905 Deerwood Trail, Kronenwetter. I would like the following to be put on record in village minutes at the Monday, 10/14/2024 board meeting. Good afternoon, Kronenwetter board and residents in attendance. I have been a village resident for 10 years now, and as of lately have been very upset with how citizens and their tax money have been treated. I've been to multiple meetings and watched countless others on this waste of time and money ambulance service proposal. The chief thought she could just sneak it right under our noses and no one would care. Boy, was she wrong. The longer this drags on, the more that residents dig into this and realize what a terrible idea it is. When James Small let everyone know that no other community in the state of Wisconsin is starting a new service, that right there should have been the end of the ambulance service proposal. Municipalities are merging services, not starting a new ones. You continue to ignore a man with multiple awards and decades of experience in this very field. Shame on every one of you that continue to push this. Stop wasting your time on something that is almost guaranteed to fail, and focus on things that actually matter in the village, like staying out of the news headlines for starters. Put your egos and feelings aside and do what is right. Let's get a contract signed with Riverside and move forward to fix this mess so generations to come don't have to.
All right, next up is Sandra Sorensen. Name and address, please.
Yes, I'm Sandra Sorensen, 1946 Deerwood Trail. So first of all, I'd like to say that the last meeting my husband and I attended, he brought it to the board's attention that, quote, your communications suck. Well, I'm here to reiterate that because we could find nothing on this meeting anywhere. It was just by happenstance that we found out that the meeting was tonight. It would be nice if these meetings are publicized a little bit in advance so people can make the proper arrangements. Second of all, last time I checked, we live in a democracy. And your vision over there said championed by the people of the village. That means us, the taxpayers. We come here, we tell you how we feel about certain things, and you're supposed to actually do what we ask you to, not what you want. So I understood that per the minutes from the last meeting, the ambulance service was being tabled until next spring when an independent feasibility study would be presented and we would know the results of that study. So I'm making an assumption that tonight we're here to hear that feasibility study. Because if there's no feasibility study, this should not even be on the agenda. It was agreed upon by everyone that was here that that was what was required before this was brought up and discussed again. Now, just because somebody wants this to happen, I don't know if I want it or not, because you haven't provided any evidence to any of us that it can actually work. And until you do, I'm sorry, my vote is no. And I'm not on the committees, I'm not here to tell you what to do, but I'm here to ask that you listen to the people here and to your community and actually do what you're asked to do. A job was given. The job was get an outside feasibility study, present it, and then, and only then, would this be brought up again. And here we are, a month later, and we're discussing the same thing again? That's BS. That's somebody's ego. Thank you.
Next up, Guy Friedel.
Okay, Guy Friedel, 2240 Ruby Drive. So I'd like to make some brief comments about a potential advisory referendum on options for ambulance service to be held in April of 2025. First, there's no great rush to do this. The referendum is almost 6 months away. Second, the ambulance subcommittee is 100% behind Kronenwetter forming its own ambulance service. The ambulance subcommittee is the last entity that should be involved in drafting the referendum question. It's biased. In order to have an unbiased referendum question, the village board should be directly involved in drafting that question. I further suggest that James Small, a recognized statewide expert, be involved in assisting with the drafting of that question. This is necessary to accurately determine the will of the people. This is not about the fire department and what the fire department wants. It's what the people want. And if you don't adhere to that, then you don't deserve to be our representatives. In addition, there should be one or more public forums that all residents of Kronenwetter receive a written notice of at least 1 week prior to the forum. These forums should present factual information both for and against the proposed Kronenwetter ambulance service and other options for future ambulance service for the village. A feasibility study should be done by James Small, who will do it for nothing, which should address the pros and the cons of all options for future ambulance services. The one public forum that was held on the formation of a village ambulance service was not preceded by a written notice to all village residents. The one public forum that was held only presented arguments and information supporting the formation of a Kronenwetter ambulance service. This was an embarrassment. It did not even address any of the other options to the village for how it gets its ambulance service. I encourage the board to take its time and to do the public forums and this referendum so the residents of Kronenwetter are well informed and are given a fair and balanced referendum question. The referendum should be drafted by the village board with the assistance of James Small. The village should provide adequate notice to all village residents in writing. And the village board and James Small should be involved in providing a fair and balanced presentation of the pros and cons about the proposed Kronenwetter ambulance service, as well as the pros and cons of all options to the village forming its own ambulance services. Thank you.
Next up, Monty Sorensen.
Monty Sorensen, 1946 Deerwood Trail. As we discussed at the last board meeting, the communication with the board, with the village, to its citizens can be much better than it has been. When we met last time, it was decided that this would be tabled till next spring, that the feasibility study would come first, and that is in the minutes. The feasibility study is what we need to be looking at. We need to find out what this is going to potentially cost the village of Weston, or village of Kronenwetter, pardon me. This is a costly proposition. When we were talking last time, just the cost for the fire trucks, not even talking the personnel or anything else, was close to $1 million, 700 to $1 million. But we don't know for sure because we don't have that feasibility study. We don't know what it is going to cost. And I think that as the stewards for the village, it is up to you to follow the proper protocols when a feasibility study has been requested, to follow through on that. And I'm assuming it has not been done yet, from what I've heard. If that is the case, then I look at the 4 items on this meeting under new business, and quite frankly, we shouldn't even be talking about them. We just do not have the information. We have already gone through talking about the contract that is already in place, recognizing that there will be some cost increases within a couple of years from where they are now. But how does that affect what we're talking about today? And the thing is, this is the kind of, you don't realize it. I said before that there's a lot of people out there upset. And there are. In this village, there's a lot of animosity right now against the board, against what's going on. And I recognize that when you go to the new business, you're going to be looking at it. And I hope you're going to be looking at Robert's rules like you normally do, because quite frankly, I don't know that you can even be discussing this. And I want to thank you, and please keep in mind that we all have to do a better job of communicating to the citizens. Thank you.
Next up, Faye Buckler.
Mr. Chair, Faye Buckberger, 824 West Nelson Road. Quickly, I want to point out that Mr. Sorensen probably meant ambulances and not fire trucks. There was a look of confusion there. So, a while ago, this board passed a motion for a third-party independent assessment of the ambulance proposal. All 7 of you. It hasn't been done. It was supposed to look at the options that are available, whether we institute our own or, say, join Riverside as a contract member where we have some control over our own decisions. Budget questions have been raised, and according to the agenda here, it kind of looks like it's being suggested that the committee can do this independent third-party evaluation for free. I'm sorry, but they're not independent, they're not a third party, and they're certainly not unbiased. They lean one direction and not either direction. Forget the RFP. Why don't we just have James Small, again, an expert from the state of Wisconsin, who will do this for free? He can come in and he can look at the options, give us a plan. He can also help address a referendum if that's where you choose to go. The committee is recommending a referendum, but I can tell that the intent of the referendum from the subcommittee meeting to the agenda item in the data package has changed. The intention of it, is it to ask the public if we support having our own ambulance service, or is it to ask the public if we are willing to take on expenses associated with it? It appears that the way it's worded at the moment, that we're not asking the public if they want it. I thought that was the intention of it based upon the discussion. So if we're going to have a referendum, we need to ask if people want this ambulance service, if we need this ambulance service. And if you approve of the referendum, please don't allow carefully chosen words to dictate the way that the issue is presented. We need someone that can put it to the citizens effectively and be unbiased in their approach so that everyone has an opportunity to address it. Our financial situation appears pretty glim, at least from my viewpoint. Our costs are far exceeding our income. We need to address this, and we need to address it before we decide if we're going to start an expensive ambulance service. I think any new spending should be curtailed until we can develop an effective plan to address why there's no growth in the village and how we are going to sustain ourselves without any growth in the village. I think we should reach out to Riverside and reach an agreement with them. We can sign for a year, we could sign for 3 years. It gives us more opportunity to look into what the financial situation is and some of the specifics on the ambulance service that remain unanswered, including the independent evaluation. Lastly, last spring, the old board, some of you weren't here, approved an RFP for the railroad accessibility study that I'll use the word sponsoring. We have an issue where the train blocks us west of the tracks. We've had a couple this week where the train approached the gate and stopped because there was no one to open the gate. That is beyond your control. That's beyond my control. That definitely is an engineer problem, and we need you guys to look at this. So I know that the board approved it, but then we went to APC and to CLIP, where the committee members decided that it wasn't important.
Faye, can you?
I got about one sentence, if that's okay. They declined to secure the money, so please, Lisa brought up the fact that we need to decide if we're going to put this money in the budget for 2025. We've been waiting for a year for you guys to be able to make some progress. Please give it thought. Thank you.
Next up, Bernie Kramer.
Good evening, Mr. President. My name is Bernie Kramer, 2150 East State Highway 153, Papillon. I want to note that you're on the county board, right? Probably one of these committees. And they had a committee report to the administrator. There was no request for any new spending for the 25 year. And he was pleased with that because he said there's no money. And he said it would, with the revenue cap, the 3% increase in salary, the health insurance, and inflation, they would still have to screw down their budgets in order to meet the requirements to stay within their budgets. Now, with that being said, I've been going to meetings in Kronenwetter way back when we were down on River Road. But you know, I've never seen such a really a bad, I don't even know how to phrase it, agenda. I mean, this is so, I mean, this would screw up anybody's head just looking at it, just trying to really make some sense out of this thing. Because, I mean, you could get lost in your head and you'd wonder if you were really thinking correct. And then I go down to the budget proposal expenses. Do you realize that there are over $500,000 in requests for budget projects in 2025? And the auditor just came back and kind of got us all squared away. I mean, I have to thank the auditing firm for kind of really waking us all up. You know, I thought for a while going to some of these meetings that we had some J.P. Morgan financial advisors in the crowd here that were explaining everything, and they knew just everything, and Kronenwetter can do anything, and we got the money. We can just, whatever we want, we can get. And there's no problem. Just say yes. And you know, it really makes one wonder in this day and age, you know, the level of competence in Kronenwetter. I mean, just where in the hell are we going as a village? I mean, we never were really great, but we never were this bad. And then we have people that don't want to do the right thing at the right time. Can't make a decent decision for nothing. And Mr. President, you know, you're the leader here. You know, you're the go-to man. I mean, and you said the last time you ran that you've improved. You've improved, but I don't know. You know, we paid off the loan to our $1 million loan just about a year ago. Then we had this credit union fiasco thing, which still isn't settled. That's $90,000 right off the bat. That's gone. We got the ambulance thing going, and there's no money, but then you're gonna float a referendum to get more money, borrow, go to the bank. And then for operations, for expenses and funding options, raise a levy, borrow, or referendum. 2 damnable referendums in one night on the agenda? How crazy can you be? I mean, it's in there. Thank you very much for letting me talk, and until next time, thank you.
Next up, Dave Baker.
Thank you. I'm Dave Baker, 690 Happy Hollow Road. And I don't actually have comments this evening. I have more suggestions or questions. So my questions relate to the audit, and I appreciate the auditor being here tonight to help explain the audit. So on page 29 of the audit, there's a list of types of fund equity, non-spendable fund balance, and I think that would be good if she could highlight that and how that relates to the large negative balance in TID 1, and then also the assigned and unassigned fund balance. I know there's been some questions and misunderstanding about that, so if she could highlight those and discuss how our assigned fund balance, the low level of that, how that's going to impact the budget construction for next year, I would appreciate that. And then on page 32 of the audit, 32 and 33, we show that there, at the end of the year, December 31st, 2023, there were cash and investments of $13,487,000. And on the treasurer's report for December 2023, the cash and investments show as $10,007,076.97. So that's about $3 million difference. And I'm confident there's a good explanation for that, but it would be helpful if, provide some feedback or some clarity on why is there a $3 million difference between our internal books and the financial statements of the audit. And then also on the cash and investment treasury report. So it looks like we have 4 different accounts, and the different funds are pooled in those accounts. And I'm wondering if there's any best practices or audit guidance, if that's a proper way to do that, or if those should be perhaps broken out some other way. And thank you.
Did you get those notes, Lisa? All right, moving on to item number 4, reports from staff and vendors. Item C, the police chief report.
All righty. I don't have a whole lot else really outside of my report. We did end up with about $2,000 worth of damage to one of our squad cars after a domestic incident over the weekend, so we'll be seeking restitution and on that. Outside of that, I'll take any calls or any questions anybody has on the report.
Anybody have any questions? No. All right, thanks, chief.
You bet.
All right, moving on to MD, the fire chief's report.
So the only thing I have to add outside of the report is we did have our open house last weekend. We raised $9,752.
Wow, that's great.
So it's a really good day. We had a really good turnout. It is on the report. We did receive the DNR grant. It's a $20,000 grant. And we have applied for the funding assistance program through the state of Wisconsin. At minimum, we will receive $10,000. So any questions on the report?
Seeing none, that's good. Thanks for the report. Moving on to item E, the Director of Public Works.
Thank you. Just kind of touching on my 5-year proposal that I have on here. Everything that is on there is replacement of things that we already own with the village. It's nothing new, it's nothing new ideas, just equipment that needs to be updated, park equipment that needs to be updated, roads that are beyond its lifespan. So that's what that is, just to maintain status quo in the next 5 years, and rough numbers for budgetary things there. Obviously, things aren't set in stone for what year. It can be moved up, can be pushed back, depending on, for instance, equipment. If we see it's still well usable, we'll push it back a handful of years to save money to use it longer. So just a rough idea of where we stand with Public Works, working with Brad and Mark on just different equipment that we have throughout the village.
Any other questions? I just want to say nice job on the bug tussle thing. I liked your responses, and get those guys finally come to the table and start talking to you.
We have another meeting tomorrow about 12:30, talk to them, so.
Very good. Nice job.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to special orders. We have Amber Danielski from Clifton Larson Allen here to discuss the 23 audit.
Good evening. So I'm going to start out just going through a handful of pages in the annual financial statements. If you want to turn just past the table of contents to page 1, this is the independent auditor's report. Just like in prior years, I just want to point out that the very beginning of this letter talks about the audit opinion, and it states that in our opinion, the financial statements referred to above present fairly in all material respects the respective financial position of the governmental activities, the business type activities, each major fund, and the aggregate remaining fund information of the village as of December 31st, 2023. In layman's terms, this is a clean opinion. It means based on our testing, we didn't find anything materially misstated or ultimately wrong where we would have to make a modified opinion on this report. If we did, there would be 3 or 4 more paragraphs on here and a whole lot of other information on there. But otherwise, the rest of that letter didn't actually change from prior years, so I'm gonna not necessarily go through the rest of it, but then turn to page 9. So this is your balance sheet as of December 31st, 2023. So this is as of point in time. And this is your assets and your liabilities and your ending result of what fund balance is. And this is only for your governmental funds. This does not include water or sewer. So starting off, the middle column there is your general fund, so your main operating fund. You had just under $5.9 million in total assets. $2.1 million was in cash and investments. And then you had taxes receivable, which is the remaining amount that was going to be collected for now the 2024 budget. And then you had this advance from other funds. So what happens on your financial statements is when other funds have a cash deficit, or you physically made a motion to borrow money or borrow cash to another fund to pay for expenditures, it has to be shown somewhere in your financial statements as that's what it is. So that's what this advance is. So over the past few years, and even current year, the general fund primarily has helped TIF 1 pay for expenses until enough increment has come in. And that's where that majority of that advance comes in. There's also that service you'll see in the column next to it also does an advance. That one had done advance to one of the other TIFs. And so as increment comes in or other revenues come in that help cover the expenses, that advance will go down. That is a normal situation when TIFs happen, and that's partly why the TIFs last for 20 to 40 years. It's because it will take time depending on development and growth in the area to get enough revenue to come in with it. So then you had total liabilities of $223,000. The majority of that is just, routine bills that came in January that were for things that happened in December that you have to pay. And then obviously like accrued wages, because the same thing happens with that. You pay in January for what they did at the end of December. Your deferred inflows of resources is your property taxes that were levied, that were adopted in the budget in November of '23, but were for 2024. So on the next year's financial statements, that's what you'll see as tax revenue. Your fund balances is what amount is left. So non-spendable, this category is when these funds have basically been spoken for or just not available for you to spend at this time. Because the majority of this is your advance to the TIF. until that TIF pays back or gets enough revenue to kind of help start paying it back, that amount is part of your fund balance, but it's in this category that, it's not really liquid for you to spend at this time. The other item that makes up this balance is prepaid insurance premiums or prepaid conferences or stuff that you might pay for in December but are really for January and February. You had $111,000 at the end of the year in those type of items. Your next category, you'll see that there's a couple other categories that are zero in the general fund. That just means like restricted is when a third party gives you funds and says you have to spend it on X, Y, or Z. Or sometimes state law says you have to spend some sort of revenue on this. And for the general fund, you don't have any of that. Committed is another layer of board approval of certain expenditures. That has to be done through formal motions, formal resolutions, and the village hasn't had any of that in a number of years. Your assigned fund balance, this is considered what's tentative management plans. These are tentative management directed expenditures. So the majority of this total, about $400,000, is what you had used to, when you were doing the 2024 budget, that you figured you were going to spend down some of your fund balance to help balance that 2024 budget. Now, you may use some of it, you may use all of it. So that's why it goes in that assigned category, because it's more tentative. It all depends on how actual expenses and revenues happen for 2024. The remaining balance is your unassigned fund balance. This is the amount that is set aside for those unanticipated expenditures or just overall cash flow. Any questions on those?
Yes, I have I guess a basic question. If we had something come up, say it's $500,000, $750,000, do we have the money somewhere here that would be accessible to us to use, like tomorrow?
Without seeing where your 2024 numbers are, you probably do have some cash balance available, whether it's from borrowing from debt service to help cover something, or maybe using some interfund or some advances from maybe water and sewer if they had some cash on hand. You have enough cash on hand. You have to remember that this is as a point of time. So like what you'd have to do is take that number and then add together the general fund revenues and expenses so far to know kind of where you're sitting.
Well,
And if it came up as of right now.
I'm saying December 31st, when this snapshot was taken.
You would have probably had to, borrow from another fund.
We'd have to scrounge.
To help.
Scrounge around. We don't have the cash on hand.
well-
I mean, the cash is designated somewhere. It's not spare cash in our, piggy bank.
Yeah, and until like when you would have gotten some of your first January settlement tax revenue, it would have likely been there because some of that revenue gets then recorded. So, when you get, the January settlement was a couple $100,000, I think. I can't recall exactly what it was, but what was collected then that amount would have been recognized as revenue then now in January, and within a matter of days, because you had collected some of that money, you would have had it in your fund balance.
But normally that would be going for what was budgeted in the following year anyway.
But you had only, to an extent, but at least if you had to, at that point in time, you would have had cash on hand to cover that.
Okay, and this 182,000, that's what we could spend on December 31st if we needed to. And if that's been spent in 2024, budget amendments taken from undesignated, that's where it would come from.
Correct.
And if we exceeded that amount, then where would it come from?
You would just be in a deficit unless you had other revenues that came in to offset it, because sometimes when you're doing budget amendments, it might have been because you had additional interest income, for example, so then that was going to help that, or you got another grant, for example, and so you were increasing revenues, increasing expenses, well then, that would offset that.
And as far as our reserve fund, that's gone.
I believe the reserves you're talking about would be also part of that 580,000 in the assigned line.
That was the budgeted deficit.
Yeah, 400,000 was in there, but then you also have, let me go to
So that cash existed, we assigned it as part of creating the budget in for the 2024
So,
budget.
so a reserve fund is supposed to be in reserve for an emergency. But like you just said, if we needed it at that time, we wouldn't have had it to spend.
I guess I'm not sure which reserve you're talking about, because there's, in that $580,000 for assigned fund balance, you also had $30,000 set aside for public works engineering, $28,000 for parks, $113,000 for major repairs, which I believe
Okay,
were to
so that's
building
all
for the roof.
what you call designated.
And that's in the assigned category, so to
Yeah,
me, those are
assigned,
reserves.
assigned. But so if we did end up spending it on an emergency, we wouldn't have it for what you just listed, and it was intended to be spent on.
Depending on how much of the overage you had, yeah, I mean, you'd have to, if there's $180,000 in reserves right now, or as of 12/31/23, so again, that's not including additions that were included into that going forward. But it would depend on how much, and again, I haven't seen everything that was adopted in 2024 to know where you're sitting from that perspective. But there's a possibility that if it happened, you would just show an unassigned deficit fund balance.
And where would that deficit, how would that be paid for?
Over time, the village would have to take steps to address the deficit.
Okay, and last year about this time, I had suggested establishing a reserve fund. We don't have anything identified as a reserve fund, and the intent was, if the money's in the reserve fund, it would be like untouchable. It wouldn't get mixed up or overspent. Is that something we could do, or is that something other municipalities have done, is to clearly designate a fund that is a reserve fund?
I mean, there are some municipalities that would say they assigned $100,000 for contingency or something like that, and then it would show up in that assigned line.
Okay, so if it's assigned to a reserve fund, then it would be in a reserve fund.
Yeah, just like that, just like those amounts on page 50 where there's the $30,000 assigned for public works engineering or the parks projects or the various projects are.
And have you ever seen, like our monthly reports that say cash on hand? I mean, in your auditing, I mean, this is what we get, we're supposed to get every month. Have you ever seen that?
I know we've looked at it at different times. It's been obviously a few months since I've looked at anything.
So it's hard for us to follow what's undesignated. Do most or any other municipalities identify on a monthly statement like this funds that are undesignated? Or is that, because to me it looks, it's hidden in here. I would never know how much undesignated funds we had throughout the year by looking at this.
I think some do. They might just put it as a narrative at the bottom that says included in these amounts above. We have 25,000 set aside for public works, 15,000 for parks or whatever it is.
And we have apparently we have a policy somewhere or resolution or something to maintain a 15% reserve fund. Is that strictly our option, or is that like a statutory requirement, or?
It's not a statutory requirement. It is a recommended thing that the village does have a fund balance policy. There's other things in that fund balance policy besides just that percent. It's up to the village at what percent you want to put it at. I see some have it as low as like 8%. Some have it as high as 30%. It depends on what the village overall feels is what it needs to have. Overall, like what we look at from an industry benchmark perspective is we usually say you want to have somewhere between 15 to 20%.
Okay, and if we engage in any, bond selling or anything, does that reserve affect our bond rating?
They look at all the totals of it, but you'd be better, you get a more informative answer if you ask your bond counsel for how deep they go into those numbers, because that part I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, I thought I remembered when we did refinancing a few years ago that they had mentioned, we had a pretty high reserve at that, like 30 or 35%, and that was something that was beneficial. So I'm just wondering, I didn't know if you knew about it.
Yeah, I know that that's one of the main things. They do look at fund balance, but they also, they take into consideration other items in there, knowing what the other operations and activities of the village are. At least that's my understanding, but your bond counsel would easily be able to answer to what degree they look at that number versus other numbers in the annual financial report or any of the other financial information that gets provided to them as you are working towards bond issuance.
Okay, so as we get to the end of the year, and let's just say all of our line items are spent exactly at what they're budgeted at. For 2024, would we have any other funds aside from what we normally get in revenue, like the taxes and the thing from the state? Is there any other money anywhere for us to use, well, like, they're talking about a splash pad, for an example. If we wanted to do that, could we do that without borrowing the money?
Without seeing where your 2024 numbers are at this point, I can't answer that.
Well, I'm just saying, if they were all zeroed out, spent.
But that doesn't, I don't know enough about other revenues that came in. I don't know what type of interest income you also had gotten in, that if, was that at or above budget? Were there other things on building permits that were above budget? Were there other miscellaneous revenues that came in that were over budget? Because all of that plays into that, and I can skip ahead to go to,
I just have, I guess, one more question.
Okay.
And that is, for the last 2 years, we've called it a balanced budget, but it's really taken more money, I guess, from undesignated to balance the budget. If our undesignated fund is empty, it seems to me we're bound to create a budget that cannot exceed the amount of revenue that we expect to take in. We don't have anywhere else to take it from. Is that?
yeah, if there's no fund balance left, but, and you want to then, at that point, it's looking at, it's also understanding though, because, okay, so you guys put $400,000 in the 2024 budget for using it. You may or may not have used all of that.
Right.
So like when you're doing the
whatever
budget,
carries
like right now, to have kind of an estimate, okay, well, we have $50,000, so maybe we can keep that 50,000 for that budgeting as well.
Okay. So whatever carries over and whatever revenue we have, that's our cap. That's our limit on spending. Okay. Okay, thanks.
Because, yeah, I just wanted to chime in a couple things because of the interactions of the funds here. So would it be correct to say that basically, I've been harping a little bit about this for over a year here about the unsustainability of our general fund. And it's important to know the difference between our debt fund and general fund. The general fund's, limited by levy limits, but, so that $2.5 million that was loaned to TID 1, that $2.5 million is effectively just an IOU in the general fund, correct?
Yep,
And TID 1 is distressed, correct?
that sounds right.
So, and TID 1's not made a single payment to the general fund since that loan has been made, correct?
Correct.
And that maneuver was made as part of a debt, I did a little bit of history, looked into the history here. That maneuver was made as part of a debt refinancing strategy. I think someone on this board is pretty proud about it, actually. Made on December 22nd, 2020. A loan from the general fund to TID 1 to avoid taking out a new loan at the end of 2020 due to a balloon note coming due or maturing. So there was an option on December 22nd, 2020, there was a vote with RDA and the village board to, rather than take out a new loan, but to front the majority of the general fund at that time. I just want to make that point right there, because that's important, because that date, you know, at the end of 2020, we knew, if you look in hindsight, right, we can't look at everything in hindsight. I know, at the end of the day, we don't ever want to raise taxes if we don't have to, but at that time, we had record low interest rates. You know, obviously in the years following, we had record high inflation we hadn't seen in over 40 years. That wasn't easily forecasted. We also had some turnover with staff started to accelerate the next year. There was a lot of changes that happened, so a lot of this, I think, wasn't easily being followed up on, the follow-up with that. I mean, I think that's part of the findings in this report is oversight of some of these funds. But I want to make those important points, though, because the board, I mean, there's been a lot of financial decisions that have been made. You know, we can't reverse the past at the time, but we do have to understand how these different funds interact with each other. It's not simple like, you know, your home finance. The fact of the matter, the real issue we have is our general fund deficit and our fund balance. And that's what we need to fix long-term. So I just want to make those points and clarify all those pieces in this report. That's all I have. Go ahead, Amy.
Does anybody have any questions in particular about the debt service, TIF 1, TIF 2, or any of those other funds? Otherwise, I thought maybe if I moved ahead to just kind of point out a couple things that might, I think, also help clarify what we were discussing with the budget to actual side. So if you go to page 15, this is your general fund budget to actual. So, so what this is just kind of showing is in a snapshot, and this goes back to what I was saying, where sometimes you have revenues come in that also help offset those expenditures. So I just want to point out, so here your general fund had $4.8 million in total revenue, and you had budgeted for $4.5 million of revenues. So that you saw an increase, you saw a benefit over budget of $294,000. A majority of that was some insurance proceeds and then interest income, because obviously the interest rates were higher, so you guys were getting more interest on your cash balances. And I know you had also moved around some cash to try and maximize those interest rates. So then your total expenditures, you had just about $5 million of total expenditures. You budgeted just under $5.2 million of total expenditures. So for 2023, you came in under budget on expenditures of $140,000. And then the next couple of spots, you have some transfers in, transfers out that are just budgeted at various reasons. They're not necessarily significant. They were small, minor things that are discussed on a footnote there. But you'll see overall, your net change in fund balance was a decrease of $225,000. You budgeted as if you were going to use $660,000. You only ended up having to use $225,000. Again, that's partly because expenditures came under budget and revenues came under budget. So those are the things that as you are working on your budget now for 2025 and you're trying to determine, is there funds that are available to apply or help balance the budget, or do you need to just continue doing cuts, or, you know, trying to maybe postpone a project or something to try and alleviate that. Those are things to consider too, is because you may have had continued interest income to help offset some of that stuff and can help you plan your way forward for 2025. And there's more details, I'm not gonna go into it, but towards the back, there's details based, especially like on the expenditure side and revenue side, that are by types of revenues and then like departments level expenditures. So there's more information if you really wanted to dive down into it. Are there any questions on that?
Yeah, just for clarity, it is 434,000. So it's a budget positive. Is that part of that 500 and some that rolled over?
Potentially. This was just because you ended up, I think you guys only rolled over 402, so you ended up letting some of this carry forward into other amounts. And some of this also gets impacted in those carryovers as well. So like on page 50 where it talks about the 113,000 that were set aside for like major repairs, some of that also came out of that 400-some thousand total, because that was brand new. Lisa, I don't know if you remember what that was for or not, but just for an example, that's also included in there.
So the 434, that includes the funds balances that, capital equipment or whatever, that normally does carry over to the next year.
Some of them, or like I said, I know that one was new, so that would have come from current year revenues.
And that's
current
included
year
in this
stuff.
434.
And yeah, and so then that would have been part, and then that would, instead of all of that flowing to the 182, some of it flowed to that 580,000
Yeah. Okay,
section.
Okay.
So then moving to page 16, we'll touch base on the water and sewer utility quick. This is your balance sheet on page 16 for your water and sewer utility. You'll see that the majority of your assets are capital assets. So it's your plant, it's your water mains, all that kind of stuff. Pretty standard. For your liabilities, the one thing that's a little different this year versus last year is you have a net pension liability. You know how we've talked in the past about Wisconsin retirement, you're part of that plan? Well, for the numbers we had to use for 2023, instead of being an asset and being overfunded, the state was underfunded. So it moved from an asset to a liability. And at the end of 2023, the utilities did not have any debt. Now in 2024, the water utility, you have the bonds that were issued, the safe drinking water loans, but ultimately you really had no long-term debt in the water or sewer utility at the end of the year. And so your net position, you had just about $11.7 million in net position for your water utility, with 9.8 of that tied up in capital assets. And for the sewer utility, just about $10.6 million in total net assets, and 9.1 tied up in capital assets. You'll see that the sewer has some restricted cash, but that's tied into certain DNR, CMR requirements about having money put aside for equipment replacement. So that's where those numbers come from. On page 17, then, this is your operating statement for the year. Your water utility had operating revenues of $868,000, but operating expenses of only $664,000, leading to operating income of $203,000. And ultimately, based on just having some more interest income and a couple other things, that fund balance increased $275,000. The sewer utility was kind of the opposite, but obviously I know you've talked before about how there were just increased operating costs in the sewer utility. So that while there was $745,000 in revenues, you had $975,000 in expenses. So you ended up with a loss in that fund in 2023. Any questions on the water or sewer utility?
Yeah, I believe, with the operating income we had, and with the low interest rate we got for the safe drinking water loan, for 2024, we did not need a rate increase. I don't believe we need a rate increase for 2025 either to finance that. The sewer utility, we did have to issue a rate hike because at the same time as we're showing this large deficit, the rates from Rib Mountain Metro Sewerage District went up 56%. So that operating loss was projected to more than double. I think about triple, and then at that point, we would have been out of funds, I believe, somewhere in 2025.
With that, then I'd like to move to page 66 to talk about the internal control findings we have. So kind of just stepping back, what we do from our audit is we come in, the past few years it's been January, we come in and talk with a variety of village personnel to understand what went on during the year, what kind of systems changes had, what kind of personnel changes went on, and what kind of projects you had. And from there, we build a risk-based audit. So based on what we know about that, what we know about the village, what we've seen based on our understanding of what we work on for all the other Wisconsin municipalities that we audit, we determine, okay, we're gonna spend more of our time here or there based on that. And we don't look at every single transaction. We pick a sample of transactions. If we actually looked at every single transaction, we'd probably still be here. And quite not, because there's just, it's not cost effective, and it's not gonna result in anything that's just not the way the audits are done. But as part of our audits, when we're looking at that, we consider internal controls. We don't do testing enough to give opinions on internal controls, but when we see something that maybe could be improved, or just something that we just stands out to us that raises to certain levels, like a significant deficiency or material weakness, we're required to communicate to that to you. And so we do have 3 of those findings this year. They're the same 3 findings we've had for the past couple years. One is the first one's segregation of duties. This one comes when you're a smaller village. You know, you never want one person being able to handle the transaction from start to finish. And sometimes you can break up those transactions and have enough different sets of eyes that you can get rid of that segregation of duties. Sometimes you can't. And so, and especially in years of turnover, that makes it even more impossible to eliminate that finding. So, you know, we're again, it's not anything new from prior years, but again, we point it out so you can be aware of it. And so as you do have things that change, whether it's finding, because you do have a new system, are there ways to enhance technology and use that technology improvement to limit who can do certain things within the software? Or can you build in extra layers of approval now because you have electronic workflows versus when everything was paper kind of thing? And so, you know, we understand what that means, you know, from having a segregation of duties finding. And our recommendation is obviously the board to continue and all the committees to continue reviewing the activity of the village and ask questions. And as things change, consider what different steps you can put in, or if it really is working at the best practice that you guys can sustain for the size of the village you're at.
Earlier this year, I believe it was earlier this year, Lisa, didn't you have some kind of software that one of the selling points on it was it would make us more compliant with these internal controls?
Yeah, so that would be the, my viewpoint, where we now have, instead of paper invoices going and getting signatures with vouchers, it goes through the system, the invoice gets scanned in and goes through an approval process in between account numbers, and Public Works case, it goes to Brad, and then it goes up to Greg, and then if it's over a certain dollar amount, it follows the chains for administrative approval, and if it's over a certain dollar amount, board approval.
Okay, so does that sound like something that complies with what
Well,
you're
that's one of the
talking
things I know we'll be focusing on when we come back, to understand and see it follow through. And it could be, depending on what we see, the finding could be revised, and maybe it's only payroll, or maybe it's only utility billings that are kept here. You know, we look at all those different variety of areas. But yeah, that kind of thing is the stuff we're saying that you want to do under our recommendation. Look at what you can, see if you can utilize technology, or utilize, you know, once you're where people are at, maybe there's additional reviews you can put in, different things like that. But yeah, that's going to be something I know we're going to be looking at when we come in and ask our question, hey, what changed? Show us how this works. And then from there, we'll consider how that finding gets revised for 2024.
Okay, and another question is, have you run into municipalities where the village clerk keeps the finance book and apparently parallel to the treasurer? Because the statute claims that the village clerk is supposed to keep a finance book, and the way it's described here with the receipts and payments and all that, I mean, have you run across that? And has any municipality that you've audited have something like that?
I think that's more at the town level, where you have, but not necessarily at villages, where what we usually see is if you might have like the village clerk, and it varies by municipality, but that one might do the bank recs, and then you compare it to what the village finance department has, or the treasurer has. I know usually, like I've seen at a town level, where the treasurer keeps a list of receipts, and then the clerk has the stuff that's in the accounting system, and at month end they reconcile between that, but not necessarily at a village level.
Okay, because this statute, 61.25, is a village chapter. So I just wondered, you know, because it,
So I know, like,
you would know, I guess.
like right now, we have the accounting clerk that puts in deposits, or our utility clerk puts in deposits, and then I reconcile bank rec.
So there's a segregation by having several different people put them in and a different person reconcile.
Well, this, like I say, in the future, you can look this up, it's 61.25, sub 3 that describes this, and, I don't know, just look into it.
Yeah,
and-
well, I just know there's municipalities that don't have separate clerk treasurers, so I'm not, even at the village level, so you'd only end up with one set of financials at that point, because you're not gonna have, they're not gonna do things twice. So it could be just that it might be written that way, but then just, that's kind of where the audit comes in then too, is just, because sometimes when you have that combined clerk treasurer, that's even more the segregation of duties issues than what you have right now. The second finding then is the preparation of the annual financial report. So this document that we're going over, the auditor is responsible for the findings section, so this part we're going through here, and then that opinion letter that's 5 or 6 pages at the beginning. Otherwise, the rest of it is village responsibility to prepare. But for cost-benefit purposes, you hire your auditor to prepare it. We see this finding at municipalities and counties and school districts. Most of them do that for that cost-benefit purpose, because to prepare something like this, sometimes that's 40 hours a year that, the village feels it's more efficient to just pay your auditor to do it and let the village personnel to continue working on your day-to-day responsibilities. But what becomes important is just so you guys are aware of that fact, and also to be doing what we're doing here in this meeting is asking questions about what you see in the report. The last finding has to do with adjustments to village's financial records. Again, this finding is a repeat finding. What we had this year was, every year we look at all of the audit entries we make as a whole. We look at the dollar amounts, we look at qualitative effects of it, and from there we determine, do we need to show a finding because the adjustments we propose are significant enough and warrant this kind of conversation with the village. And there were a few this year. There were some retainage payables that are related to the project that were recorded. There was a deposit in transit related to tax collections at year end that needed to be picked up to match your January settlement totals for December collections with what was in the general ledger. So those were just a few of the examples of the entries. And I know, so our recommendation is, just obviously having somebody continue to get some training on governmental accounting, because it is a unique set of accounting rules and doesn't always just jive from, non-government accounting to governmental accounting. And I know Lisa has asked questions on various entries as we were going through them. So again, this is a finding we do reevaluate every year, and just wanted to, again, say it, sometimes it happens every year, sometimes it doesn't. Are there any questions on the findings?
No, but I want to go back to the audit itself. We did have a question, from the citizens about page 32, how you came to $13 million in cash and investments, and our end of year statement is at $10 million.
Without knowing what that December report looked like, my hunch is it's that deposit in transit for recording December collections that were made like on December 30th and 31st, but first hit the bank on like January 2nd and 3rd, and it was an accounting adjustment to get it in. Lisa, I don't know if you're...
I'm not 100%, I'd have to look.
That would be my hunch, but without seeing the December report and being able to compare it to our files, that's my hunch as to what that is.
So you're saying there's possibly $3 million in taxes taken in and somehow deposited or something
There was some
that
accounting.
registers on one but not on the other one?
So there was an accounting entry that I was unaware that needed to be done until going through this first audit with them. Just where things get booked during the year, how things were recorded. So during my first audit, I learned a whole lot, and next year will be better.
And every year with bank statement stuff, there's always a deposit that sometimes you drop it off at the bank at 4 o'clock on Friday, And just because of when they close, it doesn't actually clear and shows up on the bank statement the very next month. So that's basically what it was. It was more, if it is what I'm thinking it is, it was just a timing difference of just when it got recorded in one spot but not the other just because of timing.
Well, it seems like a lot of money. Could we get a report on exactly what happened there? What, I mean, what you're talking about? Because I'd like to see myself how that could happen.
Anything else? Nope. Anyone else have any questions? All right, thanks, Andy.
Thank you, have a good night.
Lisa, you have anything else to add?
No.
All right. Moving on to item number 5, new business, item F. Recommend village board approve creating a referendum question related to capital expenditures for ambulance and related equipment in the mobility service.
So I can start off with this one, with the ambulance subcommittee. This item was really supposed to be merging the two with, so I don't know why it got split up, but,
I'll explain it if you mind.
yeah, I can go into that in a minute on one piece. I know there was some questions about asking why there isn't a question about generically asking why, you know, why there isn't a question generically asking if the residents would like an ambulance service in Kronenwetter. And that's because, 2023 Act 12 banned any advisory referendums not tied to capital or operating expenses. So, that's a state law that was passed last year. So, we can't ask that question unless it's basically for 4 different weird situations, like starting a telecommunications utility or some other odd situations. So basically, that axed our ability to ask a broader question, but we can ask about expenses associated with an idea. So, what the ambulance committee recommended is listed here. It says, you know, the ambulance committee recommended to approve and sign the purchase agreement with Pomisville Fire Equipment for the purchase of Demers ambulances, model MXP 170, type 1 ambulance, with both the cancellation clause and the guaranteed delivery clause. And then with that, it would also request approve moving forward with a referendum question regarding the capital expenditures associated with starting a village-run ambulance service being added to the April 2025 ballot. Now, the reason the ambulance committee requested the draft portion of this was because, like anything with committees, it's just advisory. So, basically the committee could do the work, consult with legal to draft a legal referendum question that would satisfy this item. And of course, any proposal would have to be approved by the village board, so it wouldn't necessarily bypass the village board by any means, the language of that question. The reason we need to start it now is you need at least 70 days before the election date to be proposed. So there'll need to be time for the committee to do work on this item and for the village board to review.
I got a couple questions here. Just to clarify, what question can you ask and what can't you ask?
You cannot ask advisory referendum questions except for 4 specific nuanced pieces, like one's like a boundary agreement, one's like starting a telecommunications company, or utility. There's like 2 other ones, and
Okay,
they
so-
don't apply. And then the other item is with expenses associated, capital expenses associated with.
Do you remember when the county did a referendum question 6 years ago or so about cannabis, Ken?
No.
you're not allowed to ask those kind of questions anymore. It has to be related to something to capital expenditures. There were too many organizations and government groups going around asking those types of questions, and it was just
Okay, so,
convoluting the
so
system.
you can ask them about the startup costs,
Right.
but you can't ask, you can't tell them, this may end up costing, several $100,000 a year.
No.
That's
It's only for the-
operational.
It's only for the capital expenditure costs.
Well, that's,
But that's part of,
that's really not a fair referendum, if, I mean, because the startup costs,
right.
I don't know, it's a lot, but the bigger issue here is, once we're hooked into this, and we find out people aren't going to wanna volunteer, and we have to pay them full cost, that's where the disaster can come in.
Well, you'd have to convey that through the public forums that we're talking about
Well,
as well.
Yeah, okay, so that's interesting, and I don't like it, but, and
I would
also.
recommend bringing it up with the legislature then, because I was surprised by that as well.
Okay, so now that's advisory. Now what about binding? Is there a difference for a binding referendum?
I mean, I guess we'd have to search into that piece. I mean, whether or not this is binding, I mean, I think the idea is this is an advisory referendum.
Well, it depends what you want it to do. But, okay, I guess my point here, another point,
The reason why a binding one is tricky is because, I mean, we've had a lot of discussion here, and there's been, for example, this ambulance purchase agreement with a zero-cost opt-out agreement through July of 2025, has seen pushback despite the fact that there isn't, after legal review, there isn't risk to the village to opt out prior to July of 2025. So, depending on some of these startup costs and everything else, if we can't get even this purchase agreement approved ahead of time, and there's trouble finding a long lead time item like an ambulance, it might not be feasible to start on January 1st of 2026, so.
well, okay, the plan was approved, and then it was disapproved, and then it was approved again, but at that point, if I remember right, the timeline was abandoned. We didn't, part of that reapproval included not worrying too much about January 1st of '26. You remember
Well,
the same thing?
Well, okay, so just to separate the two, I mean, just to clarify that piece, it doesn't mean not being ready for January 1st of 2026. It means if there were issues that came up and it can't start on that date, we couldn't obviously hold ourselves to that. I mean, there's a difference there.
Well,
We know our contract expires at the end of 2025, so we need something in place for 2026. We've seen from the projections that the ambulance service, as proposed, could provide general fund deficit savings of $162,000 a year and be of lower total cost than our existing contract with Riverside as is. Because the Riverside
Well,
contract currently
okay,
allows us to collect zero revenue and is only a drag on the general fund.
I'm not sure where you get this cost savings. That's part of the issue too here is if we're going to have a referendum, we have to have factual information. And now did you just say we're going to, it's gonna benefit us by 120-some thousand a year?
It's projected to reduce the general fund deficit by $162,513.41 a year.
That, who projected that, and,
It's in the committee packets.
well, didn't that include a bunch of borrowing and,
So the borrowing, so this is where it kind of gets into some of the issues with the financing. in our
Well,
village, right?
borrowing.
So
right.
the borrowing, that hits the debt levy. So there's also been discussion items about the impact to the debt levy and our current position in the debt fund. As we know now from the audit report, the general fund right now, needs some help. So, when you add in the, potential levy hike, which could be lower because this purchase agreement actually has an ambulance, at lower than the assumed cost, including all the equipment, but, you'd rather look at
Well,
worst case, that would increase the debt levy by $90,384. So a net savings of $72,000. Now,
Well,
like there
what
is
I'd
a
like to see
scenario
is-
where you look at full-time staff, where even if you break even with Riverside, it still helps the general fund.
Well,
because
it
you
helps the
put-
general fund by raising taxes with all the debt.
Right, that's the worst-case scenario.
Well, that's the only
Where you have
scenario
full-time
I've seen so
EMTs
far, and I don't
Paying
think it
benefits
helps
and pension and everything with
I
it.
don't think it helps the public to understand the ambulance issue by convoluting it in with the other debt. The ambulance issue should be looked at on its own, like the public input said. To get an evaluation of it, that was part of the committee's duties, was to somehow get some feasibility information outside of the fire department input, because we've already got that. We need to look at information from other places. And that should be done before we're even talking about a referendum, because the referendum isn't gonna be asking about all these other things you're talking about. I understand it's gonna be focused on the ambulance. It's not gonna include all these other things you're bringing into it.
Well, it wouldn't be any ongoing costs. It would be anything related to the initial costs, right? So if we needed extra equipment in the firehouse, that would be part of that. If we needed to refurb a room for living quarters or something, that would be part of that. But it would be all initial capital costs. It wouldn't be anything, excuse me, ongoing costs year after year or those types of things, wages or any of that kind of stuff.
Okay, well, I guess the more I hear about this referendum, the less I like it. And I didn't like it that much to begin with.
Well, there's
Okay.
been there's been a lot of calls from people asking to hear the people speak. This was a compromised position, right? If the people
Well-
want ambulance service, let's vote on it. If it's a yes, let's move forward. If it's a no, we're done.
Okay, so the referendum issue is separate from this purchase issue. And the purchase issue failed at the last meeting. Why is that back in front of us again?
Cause it's a new total motion,
Well,
right? It's
not
binding the
new.
two.
You're just tagging on a failed motion to
Well, it's
something
entirely
that's
new. They're
not
combined.
really even related to it.
Well, it is related because, right, they can be related, but it's a whole new motion constructively. They're tied together to have this purchase agreement with an opt-out clause tied to a referendum. If the referendum fails, then you immediately cancel the purchase contract. And we're done with the whole issue. If it succeeds, then, we
Well,
move forward with it.
The way I see it, the first step is to get our facts straight on this. Really, before we even talk about a referendum, to offer it to people, because why offer a referendum item that may very well be a bad deal? And, we want to offer them an option on something that we are relatively certain is going to benefit them and not kind of hook them into long-term expenses that they weren't expecting. And that may very well happen.
Well, and this too, Ken, this is just to work on a question. This isn't to move forward and put the referendum out there yet. This is still to work on the question.
It sounds to me like it's to approve a referendum.
Because it has to come back to the board to approve the question.
And then the other thing is, if you wanted to do that, the way you're saying, Chris, they could come up with their question first before it even comes back to a question of a referendum. But I don't see how both of these tie in together, because the study of some type, whether, you know, if the committee doesn't want to look into the feasibility, like some public input says, we have a state employee who's an expert who will do the study for free, apparently, and it's as close to objective as we're ever gonna find. And that would be extremely valuable information. We've got this other thing on the agenda to get a solid offer from Riverside as to what our costs will be on that contract. And that's valuable information too, because that's been kind of disparaged with speculation and all that. So once we compare our options as far as
Well, I'd wait up on that piece, because I believe.
a contract compared to getting into this whole ambulance situation, that should be looked at our level and if it balances out, like, yeah, it's a horse apiece, you know, then do a referendum. But if it doesn't balance out, if one side shows a lot of advantages and the other side shows disadvantages, and it's not in balance, then that should be a question at the board level. And I know some people are not comfortable voting, you know, against it, but if that's where the facts lead us, that's just what you gotta do. And it is, I don't know what the cost is of a referendum, you know, ballots and all that. It's probably not that much, but it's the idea that you should have a well-vetted idea to present to the public before you even do the referendum. I just think you should hold off, get this other information. April election, so you're saying 70 days, that'd be March, February, mid-January, we'd have to have a decision whether or not we want this referendum and have the question ready and turn it in, you know, so they can print up the ballots or whatever. So we've got a couple months. We don't have to rush into this tonight either.
I think on the contrary, we should get moving on this, because it'll take time to draft the question, get approval by the village board with all other work. And quite frankly, to get, you know, there's been commentary about messaging sucking from the board. Well, the sooner we can get it out there that there's gonna be a referendum, the sooner people can start informing themselves, the sooner we can start communicating the background to this.
Again, if there's gonna be a referendum, you kinda have your mind made up that there will be.
Oh, I think there
But
absolutely should
the
be.
initial step, which was, again, like public input said, the board voted to have a feasibility study done, and that was, I believe, a condition of approving this to begin with. And now you're skipping that part, which is the, probably the most essential part of the whole process.
Actually, hold on. Chris, before you address that part, I think you need to emphasize what the difference between a public meeting and a meeting in public. Because I keep hearing things, there's a time for public comment, and there's a time for not. And we've allowed it in the past, but I think we need to get away from doing it during the meeting. That's our discussion time, unless we invite a subject matter expert or someone from the staff or vendor to do it. But I think we need to get away from the making every board meeting a public meeting. It's simply a meeting in public. And after public comment is done, that's it.
I didn't hear any other comments other than Judy asking.
Well, I've been hearing, I can hear chirping all along, so it's just, yeah.
Well, yeah, especially when they don't agree with your position. I can understand that. But here too, we want to hear something, from the public. If it's not disruptive, and actually at the last meeting, when Chris Iden was chair, I thought it was a really good meeting because we had input.
Well, that's what public comment is for.
Well.
And I believe, 5, 6 people spoke about that subject. So, I mean, their pointer is made, and it's not because it dissents from my position. I'm saying we need to get back to the way these meetings are to be held. A public hearing is a public meeting. A village board meeting is a meeting in public, where it has a designated time, and then after that, that's it.
Well, if you want to stick to the rules, that's fine, but then we should also stick to Robert's rules as far as a motion for reconsideration. That would have to have been brought by me or Chris.
Well, in my opinion, this is a wholly different motion here.
Well, that's your opinion, but it's, again, you've tagged on a failed item to basically an unrelated thing to get around the issue of Robert's rules. So
Well,
it looks
I
like.
don't think that's true at all. The point of this is to really let the public speak on a referendum, yay or nay. If it's yay, we're in a place we can do the public's bidding on time.
And
And
then
if it's
purchase
nay,
the ambulance.
Then
After
we
it's
cancel the
approved.
agreement. I mean, there's a lot of work that went into, changing the contract to make sure that we were protected to be able to back out. Giving enough wiggle room after the next, general, I guess, local election. And protecting ourselves too for delivery, if it is a yes.
Well, again, the process wasn't followed. You kind of put the cart before the horse. And I still don't know whatever happened to that issue of getting a feasibility study. That was agreed on by the board,
Well,
and
it's
it just kind of disappeared.
It was a joint implementation and feasibility committee. That's what was created. When one of the issues that could have been that could be still looked at is having a third-party evaluation. I don't think the committee's said no to it, but I mean, I will say this, I mean, we have, some committee members in attendance here, tonight. I mean, the board has, I guess, repeatedly at this point, I guess, completely ignored any of the recommendations from the committee. So I think, at the same time, there's some frustration from the committee that, why are they doing this work? Because I see this other item on here, trying to lock the village into a 3 to 5 year contract when we have a committee that is an implementation and feasibility committee to start an ambulance service. I mean, that doesn't show support at all to our volunteers in the
Now,
fire department.
I will say, I was leery of the mixed messaging there as well, but it does say in that agenda item that this is completely separate from the ambulance committee, and it understands that one does not impede the other. We're trying to move forward on multiple fronts to determine what is.
That's what you're supposed to be doing all along.
Right, so that, no, I don't have a problem with what's being done there with Rothschild. That, you know, we're doing our due diligence there, just as the committee's doing their due diligence. And eventually, we're gonna get to a point where we will make a decision. But I do believe we need to move forward in multiple tracks at the same time. So, no, that part I will disagree with you, because it is made clear in there that it was not to interfere, it's just to have our bases covered, you know, before
Well,
it's too late.
it's valuable information. The committee should be glad to get that information if they're going to do any kind of evaluation at all. Because at the last meeting, Chris, you missed it, but, Chris Vole missed it, that, there was speculation about how much the increases would be and all this other stuff, and this would settle that question.
Okay, but do we wanna save that for that agenda item?
Well, I mean,
Well, I know, it's all kind of melting
tied
together
together.
here.
I know it says it's not meant to impede, but you sign a 3 to 5 year contract and you send, let's say this were to go to referendum, it goes to referendum, it passes, but we're already locked in a 3 to 5 year contract. What was the point of I mean, that's like frankly kind of ridiculous to say it wouldn't impede with anything else if you do this item. If you
Well,
do
maybe
that
that
item
item
with this item.
Maybe that item wasn't worded right either, because there's no contract to talk about tonight.
Right, there isn't a contract at all.
So maybe
There's no
maybe it should have
offer.
said just contact Rothschild for a purchase agreement or something. Maybe it should have been constructed that way instead, but I didn't write the motion or the item.
I mean, I know it's a different agenda item, but, I mean,
You know, one thing that I'm kind of having a hard time with, and, you know, like I said, I've said this in the past, I appreciate all your work you guys do and all that, but I still have my own reservations. I know I talked with another committee member at quite a deal about, you know, my feelings on this. Because if we go back in time to the very first, presentation that we had with the ambulance service, I know there was a thing in the Village Voice newsletter that said, you know, you can have the same service without raising taxes. And then, you know, we went through the presentation, and the presentation was good. I mean, I went through a lot of the numbers like the ambulance and to kind of double check that stuff, and, you know, that matched up. But the part that I had a problem with is the actual revenue itself. And, you know, we've actually heard that the revenue would be good, at that time, would be good enough where we'd be able to donate money to roads and, you know, that's all reported.
And parks, yeah.
In parks, and then, really, once we started delving into it, you know, I contacted other people, and there's other people that came forward, you know, that, like, for instance, one of them, I had a member from the audience, at the one meeting tell me about, look at Nakusa's fire department, or ambulance service, it went debunked. There's a lot of services out there that, you know, we were getting billed, you know, we're billing out $1 million, we're only getting $250,000 back. So a lot of that stuff scares me, and I have not really seen anything to sway me to say, you know what, yeah, I want an ambulance service. So, you know, that's like I say, I'm so skeptical. It kind of, as I told that committee member, it scares me, because we know that over time, that nothing stays the same. I mean, you know, I know we're pushing the ambulance, we gotta get it because it's such a lead time. And one of my comments were last time, I mean, yeah, we got this brand new ambulance, we're going on our first call, we get T-boned. Now is our ambulance service done because we gotta, you know, we don't have an ambulance and it's gonna take us a year to get one? So, like I said, all this stuff scares me, and I'm just a simple guy, and I just wanna have the answers that a lot of these public have been asking me, because they don't understand it either, and they're really putting a lot of pressure on me, and then I understand why they are, because I feel the same way. So, I mean, I know the committee member said that, you know, you've had a lot of great numbers, but I really haven't seen anything. Nothing's presented to the board to really try to say, okay, let's explain everything, and then we can all understand kind of what you understand, so.
Sure.
And that's what frustrates me, because, you know, like I say, I've read on Facebook where I'm an obstructionist, and, you know, to me, that kind of hurts, because I've never said anything negative about anybody. And, I mean, I just literally want to understand.
Well,
Yeah.
basically, it boils down to.
I was gonna answer some of his questions, but I'll let you speak because you spoke first.
Okay, well, we've been told by, you know, informed sources that these places are going under, these ambulance services. They're consolidating. No one else in the state is doing what is proposed here. So we have a lot of odds to overcome. And I would say it's on the proponents of this plan to prove to the public that it is a good idea, because all the other evidence indicates it's not.
So my response to some of the statements and questions to start, some evidence to show, to back some of the numbers are Riverside's actual numbers from this year. I know Bernie Kramer in the crowd has attended all of our ambulance committee meetings. He supplied Riverside's actuals from this year. It's right in line with what the spreadsheet was showing for revenues. It was showing 247,000 in billable revenues. Well, if you have your own ambulance service, you can gather some additional revenue through grants and 2% fire dues as well. So adding in Chief O'Brien's proposal, the $20,000 a year, projecting that, which may be a great underestimation for, there's a fair amount of grant money provided out there. I could let the chief speak more about that. It's right in line. It's within $15,000. And this is a below average ambulance call year for Riverside. They had higher numbers of ambulance calls in 2022 and 2023. They have taken a dip thus so far through this year compared to where they were. You know, I'm not skeptical we'll pull in those revenues. Obviously, there's concern about the expenses the committee's working through on all that, but there's a lot of margin in here, particularly towards the general fund. And that's the piece that is struggling in this village that we need to look at. I mean, there's not too many different options that we have to fix this. You can either go to a referendum to increase the general fund, you can take on debt, or you can cut services and investments. Well, this is an attempt to get a win-win. To improve services, or at least keep them the same in quality, while pulling in additional billing revenue to offset the operating expenses of the ambulance. We also have a debt fund surplus of about $580,000 that we could use to ease in any levy changes due to adding debt. We've looked at that too, a debt fund analysis, including redoing Kronenwetter Drive. I mean, when we looked at it, we assumed $2 million. Well, that's coming in under $1.5 million. Doing Kronenwetter Drive, ambulance service, and a capital restructure of the police department, you could keep taxes flat through 2028, which is a critical year because in 2028, about 85% of our debt, existing debt, matures. I mean, the idea is, you know, no longer, we're out of the easy gravy part because most of our general fund is gone. The undesignated fund balance that we thought was there, most of it was lent to TID 1. We can't change that. That happened. We gotta move on from it, but we have to fix this. And unfortunately, we have to do some difficult things. I mean, it would be easy to stick with going with an RFP for Riverside or Safer or whoever and not have to worry about it. I get that, but quite frankly, making those easy decisions are not going to be possible or feasible for this village anymore.
Well, it's an easy decision because that's where all the facts and the numbers direct us. And the
What
risk.
facts?
And the risk.
It's an automatic like for 2026, an automatic $139,000 expense because as part of that contract, we still have to have an EMS budget beyond it.
We have that anyway.
Right, but that would be rolled into the ambulance service.
Yeah. Well, we're paying for it either way.
Well, right, but we can't collect any revenue whatsoever for providing that service. We
But
can,
we wouldn't
we can
have the-
collect zero revenue whatsoever. All
We
the billing
wouldn't
revenue
have
goes
the
to
expense
Riverside.
of running it either. That's the whole point is sure, you got a lot of money coming in, but then you got a lot of money going out and,
And the point is to break even on operating costs.
well, that is yet to be seen because we've been informed that it might last for a year or two, and then the labor costs are going to, basically gonna kill us. Which is what it's done all over the place.
Now, I've heard there was a statement, nobody has ever started, no one else in this state is starting an ambulance service right now. I would like to ask the fire chief, is that true?
No, that is not true. There are actually 3 that are currently starting. One started in 2024 and 2 more are starting up on January 1st of 25.
Who are they?
City of Portage, Town of Grand Chute, and Village
Wait.
of Howard.
The city of Portage.
I think we're getting off.
Also in the last week, there were 2 municipalities that have voted to exit a district because of cost of being merged services.
Well, everybody's situation's different. Our service has been great so far.
Can I make an additional statement? It's in regards to the need for services in this area.
Well, it's really beyond what the scope of the item is on the agenda. We're not here to discuss whether we're gonna do an ambulance service or not. It's, do we wanna create a question for a referendum or not? That's the item on the agenda, not talking about the facts and figures of an ambulance service, who's starting a service, who's not starting a service.
I mean, it's
That's not the item.
Yeah, I understand.
So wait, your motion is
Nobody's
not,
made a motion.
is not to, okay. The intended motion would be not to commit to a referendum, but first to have someone come up with the question before we even decide if we want to use that question for a referendum.
Right, it would be,
That's my
I make a motion to, that the board approve the creation of a referendum question regarding, an advisory referendum question, regarding Kronenwetter ambulance service.
And approve the,
Related to capital expenditure.
Yeah, related to capital expenditures, that's what I was looking for here, yeah.
and approve the purchase agreement with opt-out clause and delivery guarantee.
Yeah, see, you're just tying two separate things together here.
I think that's a bridge too far.
So Kelly, is that a motion?
Yeah, that's a motion.
What is, I guess,
It's-
just to clarify the motion.
Make a motion to approve going forward with the creation of a referendum question for Kronenwetter ambulance services, or service related to the startup capital expenditures.
Is there a second? Second. All right, Kelly made a motion, Aaron made a second, to recommend the village board create a question related to the creation of a ambulance service as it relates to the capital expenditures. Any further discussion? Hearing none, call the roll, please.
Chris Iden,
No.
Ken Charneski.
No,
Chris Vold,
Yes.
Aaron Mishka,
Yes.
Kelly Coyle,
Yes.
Alex Fedvik.
Yes.
All right, motion carried, 4-2. All right, moving on, item G, reconsideration of motion previously considered by the board on 9/23 regarding contract to purchase of the ambulance. So I asked the attorney about this one, and he had told me that because it was a tie vote, and not a motion or a vote yes to do or not to do, that it was a tie, that it could be reconsidered.
Well, then he must have taken that from Robert's rules. And did he give you a copy of Robert's rules that says
He
that?
said that didn't apply to, he showed me where it was in the Roberts rules, and it was because it was a tie. Now, if it had been a, like a 3-4 vote or whatever, not a tie,
Well,
that would be the difference.
it did fail, and
Well, I'm just telling you what he told me.
well, I don't accept his opinion. I mean,
Well, on many reasons, I'm sure.
yeah, but I don't believe we should proceed on it, based on that. I would have thought he would have, given you a copy of the page that he's taken that from. So, I think we should move on from this issue. You got time to approve it yet. It doesn't have to be at this meeting.
Right.
Well, but the ambulance is, it locks us into that price. And I will say this, I mean, you can get me on record. If we get this to referendum and it fails, I'll be the first one to come up to cancel our purchase agreement with the ambulance.
Well, you won't have a choice. And I think the reason this issue is so divisive is because we don't have the facts. We don't have a good source of third-party facts that everyone is willing to accept. I mean, I thought bringing in James Small was a good move, because he has no dog in this fight. He does this all over, and I think his input was, should be paid attention to. And I don't know how long it would take him to do a feasibility, actual, more intense feasibility study. Plenty of time, I would think, before this deadline, to do a referendum. But I just think it's irresponsible to put out a referendum or even to make this purchase until we get the facts that we should have gotten a month or two ago.
All right, well, these are two items we'll set aside. I'll get more clarification on them from the attorney. I'll get some in writing. All right, so moving on to item I then. Continuance.
Is that how that goes? I mean, I just want to clarify on these two items, just because that would effectively delay this again 2 more weeks till after the next ambulance committee meeting. I know, I guess that's my question on that. If you said that attorney thought it was a 3-3, he definitively said that?
It was a 3-3 vote.
Yeah, but he definitively said,
Yeah, because it's time.
so don't we have to go off our legal?
He told me over the phone, I don't have it in writing. Because we were scrambling at the last minute to get the agenda done. So I was talking to him on the phone and sending it to him, and he said it looked fine. The way we had it presented like this. I even asked him about the verbiage of reconsideration, and I talked to him about that very instance of having somebody that was from the affirmative that would need to bring it back as a reconsideration. And that's what he explained, because he believes because it was tie, that it didn't really fall into that same format.
So who are we gonna believe here?
So
Well, I don't have it in writing, so.
So it failed, and the side that voted against it was the prevailing side, because the motion failed. And the prevailing side is the one that has to make the motion for reconsideration, because if it wasn't,
That's what I need clarification on, 'cause that's what we're stuck on.
Because if that wasn't the case, then every time somebody lost a vote, they would say,
Yeah.
well, I want a motion to
But I
reconsider.
thought that piece of Robert's rules, if that's what you're quoting, had to be made in the same day.
No,
Yeah.
No, I think that part is, well, my understanding is it had to be in the same meeting.
No, there's, you don't have to do that. If you look
Well,
at
if-
Robert's rules, it doesn't have a timeline.
Okay.
But when you do some quick Google search,
Municipality.
sometimes it says
Well,
24 hours.
I guess I'd be in
sometimes
favor
it's-
of tabling this until the next meeting, get some more clarification, and, I guess bring it back in writing, whatever we, so we can have a clear, cause
Right, I don't want any missteps.
yeah.
Yep, all right. Okay, so item I, continuance of current contract with Riverside Ambulance.
well, we kind of talked about this already, and it's not to agree to a contract. It's to get
Right.
a firm, cost for us to consider, so we know where we're at, so we can eliminate the speculation of what they might do. This would give
It
us
says
solid
submit an
information.
offer, though.
What?
It says submit an offer to continue the current contract. That's what the proposal says.
Well, that's what they would
That
be
would
doing,
like- that would be
a
like
firm
That would
offer.
be like yeah, that would be a.
That doesn't
like
mean
entering in-
we
agreeing
will
to enter
accept
into a
it.
Contract. If you said submitting a firm offer, what, from us?
No, from
Like
them.
a signed offer from us?
From them to us. Because they're the ones who will set the cost. And they're offering it to us. If that's not worded right, then I maybe didn't word it right, I don't have it in front of me, but that's not the intent. If there was an offer from us to them, that would be in the packet.
Right.
What we're saying is to
We're
get
basically
a,
asking for an RFP.
what's that?
We're asking for an RFP.
Well,
Okay, well,
Right?
if that's what
Right?
you want,
That's what we're asking, right? We're saying, hey,
Okay.
give us your price. Right? Is that what you're asking for? Give us your.
well, basically a cost, because I think the contract that's in the packet is fine, as far as that goes, the terms of it. It's basically the cost is what we're looking for to end the speculation on that.
But the piece you're still missing is, they could offer that all day long. What is the Rothschild board saying on it?
Well,
It's easy for them to say, we'll give you 2%
this is where it's
increase
coming
every year.
from,
But if their board,
is-
if it goes to their board, and their board says, no, we're not gonna continue losing money on this
Well-
contract,
well, once-
then that changes everything.
One side has to, they're not gonna give us an offer and then say, no, we changed our mind.
Well, no,
They
the fire
might,
department wouldn't
they
do it,
might,
either
but-
board.
It has to be a legitimate offer from Rothschild. It can't just be speculation like we.
Right, and that's what I'm
Right.
saying, is this has to be, if we're even gonna consider something,
Yeah.
their board's gonna have to have a say in it first. It can't just come
All
from
right,
their
that's,
fire and EMS
that's,
district.
it's not their village board, it would be their fire board.
Or their-
whoever.
between
The
fire
people,
division.
the people
The
who
bottom-
have the authority to make the decision.
Right, so right now, this is meaningless until someone with some authority can say, yeah, we could do 2%.
Yeah.
Until that time,
That's what we're
this
asking
is, this is
for.
completely useless.
At that point, we should, also, I don't know if anyone's consulted with the fire chief. You just stated that everything is fine with our contract. I don't know. Is every item in the contract being met? That's a bold assertion, but on top of that, on these types of contracts, for various reasons, you usually go to competitive bid, a competitive RFP, because I know it's an ordinance about contracts over $25,000 needing, competitive bid, but the reason for that, I believe, at least, is that there's also state law provisions requiring competitive bids on those types of contracts. So even offering them and
I don't know if
them
there is.
supplying that,
You'd have
You
to
wanna-
have that statute.
we need to go on the.
And I don't know if it
municipalities.
applies if we are.
You can go to the
renewing a
Wisconsin DNR, all kinds of state agencies that provide grant fundings, basically saying they strongly recommend grant recipients, consult with their attorneys to ensure compliance with bidding requirements and procedures. you know, effectively, there could be some nuance with that.
Well, basically, if it was something we followed through on, it would be a renewal anyway, you know.
So, Chief, is Riverside meeting all 25 items of this contract?
No.
Could you elaborate?
So one of the pieces of the contract is they're supposed to have to us by the 10th of the month, the previous month's numbers. We had to ask for them today to get them. That is used for their billing. This is not the first time this has happened. In addition, they are supposed to train with us quarterly. And how many times have they trained with us in the last 2 years? 1? 2? In the last 2 years? 2 years? 2 times? They have not even offered to come and train with us. Even though we have reached out in some cases, we reached out this spring and asked for some training. I know some issues with their former chief some of that may have fallen behind, but this has been an ongoing thing. In addition, one of the things that I would like to see in the future contract is something that protects the residents here. There is no standard how our residents get billed, whether it's resident or non-resident, and we've had people in this room state that they were billed as non-residents. That should be in our contract. That should be protecting our people.
And I guess that's a higher rate if it's non-resident.
It is a much higher rate for a non-resident. And most people are not gonna look at that. They're gonna look at their bill and pay it, or their insurance is going to pay it, and
Right.
it's never even questioned, but it should be questioned.
So what would your recommendation on that if the board were to be willing or was wanting to gather more information on what the alternative to starting an ambulance service be?
I apologize, say that again.
I know it was kind of long-winded, but what would your recommendation be regarding what the board should do if the board does want to, if this is truly a information item, to gather more information on the alternative to starting an ambulance service? What would your recommendation be to gather that information?
I would recommend, for starters, to let the committee continue to gather information, but if you're looking at trying to get numbers from outside sources, go out for RFP. And have those additional items that we want in those contracts in that RFP, so they can quote them accordingly.
Have any of these issues been brought to their attention, like
Yes.
this billing thing?
Yes.
And what do they say?
You're talking the resident, non-resident? If the resident can call their billing company and they'll have it corrected.
Okay.
But if they don't know, if they don't know that they're not supposed to be billed as non-resident, and again, that is a communication that should be coming from our contracted provider to our residents. If they don't know, they're not gonna question it. But they should be questioning it. I thought that it was my understanding when we contracted with them, our residents of Kronenwetter would always be billed as resident, and that is not the case. It is supposed to be based on zip code. That isn't the case either, because we've had residents in this room state that they've been billed as non-resident. We've also had charges to the village of Kronenwetter for calls that actually were in Mosinee and Rothschild. We've had to, a number of times over the last few months, have them correct their billing to us because of that. So there's no quality control happening, and that's a big issue.
And are they doing the billing, or are they contracting to somebody for that?
It's contracted out, however, per their captain, it is determined based on their report.
Well, that's something to talk to them about, but at this point, we're looking for a cost. The item is not talking about RFP, it's talking about a cost. And then if we do decide to pursue it, then you say, hey, we got these issues, are you gonna fix them? But right now, we're just looking for the cost.
Well, if you change the contract though, then
that's not a renewal.
That would be later.
that might change the cost, right? Because you have a different
Well,
contract with
we
different
would,
provisions.
that would be after we get their cost and say, here's some issues, can you fix them? And if you fix them, is that going to affect the cost? But we have to start somewhere. And the cost is what we're looking for right now.
So it looks like these issues that Teresa had mentioned are in the contract, they're just not following them.
Well, what is our recourse for not following them?
Nothing.
So like, let's say,
There should be
so
something.
there's
Yeah, there should be
nothing we
some
can
kind of
do.
clause or something. Yeah, but that's just a termination clause. Let's talk about it.
if they breach this agreement.
So the only option to hold them to it is to threaten to terminate the agreement in its entirety.
Yeah, that's what it looks like to me.
Which, okay,
But you
makes
wouldn't do
sense to
that.
have that, but
You
at the
wouldn't
same,
do it, though.
would you threaten that, cause then you have no back, like, you know, there's no other provisions in the contract either that could be used to, it's kinda how far do they wanna push it? I mean, I don't, I mean,
All right. Let me
Well,
just,
this item in front of us is, you know, to get a cost. So we can take that issue off the table, or whatever we're gonna do with it, but we have a number as an alternative to whatever the other plan is. We want different options, and one of the options is to remain with Riverside, and we need to have our facts in that direction, just like we need to have our facts lined up with doing our own ambulance service.
well, if it's a true alternative, then you should go to RFP, not just offer some agreement that probably won't be, you know, accepted as is.
Well, again, you're speculating, and that's what we're trying to get away from is speculation here.
if something official could come from Rothschild and say, yeah, you're locked in at that 2%, I would be, you know, short of having a signed contract, I'd be thrilled with that alternative path. But right now, I guess the way I see it, is Rothschild is really, we're kind of sitting in the catbird seat in this regard. Because right now, Rothschild, without us, does not survive economically, which would cause them to combine with Safer. So I could see where it would behoove them to give us favorable terms.
Well,
However, they need to make a decision here pretty soon on whether or not they're going to combine. So, you know, I guess I don't mind going forward with this as an alternative path that we are not obligated to until such time that we are. But I'm just saying that, you know, I understand where Riverside's at on this.
Well,
It's about
and they-
their,
and
it's
they-
about their survival as well.
They've told us they're willing to work with us.
Yeah.
Several times.
Because they're gonna feel like they
So-
lose complete control if they have to combine with Safer.
Well, they told me that they don't need Kronenwetter to survive as an entity.
Well,
I
we're
don't
off
know
the
how it
subject,
would be
so.
possible, but
Well, they're losing money in their contract right now, so.
So what do
they're,
you guys wanna
you
do with
know,
this?
they got a magical money tree.
I mean, to me, if you want a true alternative, you need to go to RFP, I think.
So you guys got a motion?
I'll move that we ask Riverside for an authoritative,
Official.
one of them,
Official.
cost on renewing
Contract
our
renewal.
contract, subject to, negotiating grievances, current grievances.
I'll second. You got a motion by Ken, second by Chris to request Riverside provide a contract renewal subject to, what was your other part of that?
subject to addressing these grievances.
Yep, so I'm just addressing it. All right. Is there any other discussion?
I think that motion's very vague, but who are we sending? And then just to say Riverside, the Riverside Board, Riverside staff? Who are we sending that?
Well, we want an actual value, cost, we want to, so we're not gonna get it from the custodian.
Right,
You know, if we're gonna get something, it's gonna come from the board, or the police and fire commission, whoever's
Well,
gonna determine that.
They got a fire district or whatever. They got their own board on that fire district.
Whoever supplied the last contract, that's who will ask for a revised cost.
okay.
Any other discussion? Go ahead and call a roll, please.
Chris Iden?
Yes.
Ken Charneski?
Yes.
Alex Vedvik?
No,
Kelly Coyle?
Yes.
Aaron Mishka?
No.
Chris Wolf?
Yes. All right, motion carried, 4-2. All right. So hopefully we'll get some information with that in a couple of weeks. We'll get more clarification upon the ambulance contract in a couple of weeks, and maybe that'll also give the group time to work on a question for reference. All right, moving on to item J, updating membership designees for the Metropolitan Planning Organization meetings.
Okay, who is this now? Is that you, Chris?
Yeah, it was me, and had been Richard, had been Randy, I think Guy is on it. It's over the turnover and stuff, they're not really sure who's on the committee anymore, and since we've got
Okay,
some new staff.
have you been attending it?
Yeah, I've been calling in.
Okay, and I guess, would you mind if Guy or possibly Dave or somebody else would take that over, you
Well,
know?
technically, it should be Greg as the lead guy, and then Pete, and then either the administrator or the village president is the third backup. That's how it used to be.
Right. And is that required, or is that just how we did it?
Well, everybody else that's on these committees they're all municipal people. So that's part of the job titles, that these guys attend these things.
Okay, so who do we have? We got Pete now? And
We
you?
have Greg is number one.
Oh, Greg is, oh, okay, well,
Yeah, Greg would be one, Pete would be two, and then either the administrator or village president would be three.
oh, well. Okay, well, we'll keep an eye on you guys.
sure you will. So are you looking for a motion on this?
Yes.
I move we appoint Greg, or Public Works Director Greg Ullman to be our representative to MP.
Pete Wagner.
Yep, and our alternate to be, Pete Wagner, or Community Development Director Pete Wagner, to the MPO, and
And just have it make the third one the administrator,
the third one be the administrator.
and I'll just stand in until the administrator gets time. I'll second. All right, so the appointees will be Greg, Pete, and administrator. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
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 All opposed? Motion carried. All right, moving on to item K, Martin Road, suggested reduced speed limit.
All right, this item came up at CLIP, and the reason that it got brought up is I got a call from several residents along Martin Road that wanted it to be reduced just for the fact of, the road condition isn't as good. And a lot of times that they're pulling out of their driveway, and some of these cars are going at a pretty good rate of speed.
They're going faster than 55.
Oh, yeah, a lot of them going fast. But, the police chief did put out the speed sign.
Yeah.
And it looked like the actually average speed was about 48 miles an hour.
Oh, really?
So, which was actually kind of a surprise. And actually, some of the surrounding roads are 45. It was unanimously voted at the clip to reduce it to 45. So that's the suggestion that we brought from the clip.
And Chief, you have any heartache with that?
No, I don't. I don't have any heartburn with that going to 45.
And then, so I guess Greg, staff would be out changing signs?
Correct. Correct.
Do you know how many signs there are that we would change?
We would be purchasing new signs. It'd be about $120 for the signs. We have,
Oh, if you just don't re-sticker them or something?
Take some from Weston?
Take some spray paint or something and change the number.
yeah, the stickers do have a tendency to fall off over time and people can peel them off and you name it. So just basically 2 new signs, be about $120. We have it in the budget.
Oh, okay.
I guess it'd be nice to know, now they got these maximum speeds. It'd be nice to know how many there was. Maybe it's just one guy a day or what it was. It does seem kinda unfair to, people who are driving, 50 or 55 like they should. I mean, if they're speeders, why don't we have cops out there?
Well, I guess the suggestion was that it probably should be 45. All the residents are kind of asking for that, who live there, wanting it to be 45.
And did you have like a petition or anything?
It wasn't a petition, I got several calls from quite a few people on it. It started out with one, and then I think some of the other neighbors got on the bandwagon and asked me to put it on the agenda.
Residents that showed up too.
Yeah, and there was residents that showed up, so.
So am I reading this right, Chief? In August 18th, somebody actually went 94 miles an hour on that road?
Yeah, so when you put that thing out, you run that risk that somebody's gonna, this is just my
But they're trying
theory,
to
right?
make
They're
it-
just gonna see how high they can get the speed board to show.
Like you've
Well,
never done that.
That's those new golf carts doing that.
Yeah. But then unfortunately, we don't have a camera on that either, though, do we?
No, unfortunately, no.
I guess if they go that fast, I guess that road doesn't need to be repaved.
Exactly. With that, I'll just make the motion to reduce Martin Road speed limit to 45.
Second.
Got a motion by Chris, second by Alex to reduce the limit of Martin Road to 45. Any other discussion? This is we probably should call a roll on this.
Alex Vedvik,
Yes.
Chris Iden,
Yes.
Aaron Mishka,
Yes.
Ken Charneski,
I'm gonna go no on this one.
Chris Volk.
Yes. Motion carried. What was it, 5 of us now?
Yeah.
4 to 1. All right, moving on. Item L, proposed development of bike path access for Towering Pines Park, to Evergreen Elementary School at 0 cost.
Thank you.
Yes, please.
This was at the CLIP committee the other day. They approved this, so we had a resident who, I shouldn't say a resident, but local people who are volunteering their time behind the school over here off of Tower Drive in Pine Road. They are putting in a mountain bike path system with jumps, ramps, you name it, open to the public. You don't need to be a resident of the village, you don't need to be a member of the school or district at all, open for anybody. So they came to me asking for paths through our park. One would be on the very north side of Towering Pines, right along our property line over there. They would install it at no cost to us. Another one would be on the south side as well, just north of the walking path. It would be 2 different style paths, so somebody wouldn't interchange the walking path between the mountain bike path. So this would benefit all the residents who live around there, or we could get some people to come in Kronenwetter to utilize this. So they just asked for not necessarily an easement, but just a path through the park to get to their trails.
Okay, well, I guess I like the idea of the volunteer thing. One thing, I guess I don't know if I'm concerned about it or not, but I'd like to make it clear where our flat path ends and their, so-called dangerous path begins, so nobody kind of associates us with them breaking their arm inside the park, But I'll move to approve the creation of the 2 locations at Towering Park.
I'll second.
Got a motion by Ken and a second by Aaron to approve the bike path accessibilities for Tyree Pines Park at the elementary school. So Greg, is the blue lines coming down from Tower, are those the two that you're talking about?
Correct.
Because once you get beyond that, that's all part of their.
That's all their property. Yep, that's, the different colors on there are different stages of expertise, basically. Intermediate, beginner, all those things.
Black diamond.
Yeah.
And those, that, not that you know a lot about it, but that would all be open during regular school hours as well?
All the time, is my understanding. Yep, year round.
All right, we got a motion second to approve. Any other discussion?
Nope, there's no outdoor recs, rapidly growing, driver of people liking an area, or attractor of people, so not against it.
Well, I think our residents will get some good use out of it too. It's right in our backyard. All right, hearing no other discussion, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carried. Item M, hiring of a surveyor to install a gravel road base on Lane Road for development of a vehicle turnaround.
All right, for this one, on Lane Road, where the road dead ends into private property, they always used to have a gravel driveway at the end of Lane Road. And we use that for our plow trucks to turn around and come back out of the road. Recently, I should say this year, they paved it with asphalt. To prevent any damage from the village's end going on their asphalt, they asked that we don't use it anymore. So we have an easement down there that is wide enough, according to the maps here, that we have an extra 54 feet off the road for the easement. So we have enough room to put like a semicircle down there for our plow trucks and any other vehicle to turn around. So it's all village property. So the cost for that, and go back up, I apologize here. So with the surveyor and with putting down the gravel base, it would be about $3,500 for that, to not go on any resident's property, not do any damage, and we would stay at least minimum 10 feet off their property. So this winter, before we have a chance of chip seal it, which we would like to do next year with just updated, updating the roads in the village, we would stay off their property, like I said, by 10 feet, so we don't run the risk of pushing any gravel into their lot at all.
Well, we're broke, right? We just heard that.
Yeah, we do have the money in the budget.
Okay, I know, I'm just joking.
I know.
Okay, I'll move to direct staff to proceed to install this turnaround.
Second.
Got a motion by Ken, second by Chris to approve the surveyor and to install a gravel road base for turnaround lane at Lane Road. Any further discussion? Hearing none, call roll please.
Chris Bull,
Yes?
Ken Charneski.
Yes?
Aaron Mishka,
Yes.
Chris Iden.
Yes.
Alex Medvick.
Yes.
All right, motion carried, 5-0. Moving on, item N, 2025 budget proposal, expenses and funding options.
So,
I
don't know, if you guys wanna go through each one of the bullet points and kinda go through and decide which ones you would like to be part of the 25 budget, which ones you would like to take out, how you wanna fund them. Part of the other question that I have on here is, this is pretty much everybody's wish list of things that they would like. So they're extras up and over the operating, and they're just some items that kind of really came at a cost. So the other question that is on here is whether or not you guys would like to get together after I go back with whatever answers you have tonight and kind of set up another night where you guys could go through the 25 budget, whether it be line by line or as a whole, ask whatever questions and get those done before the public hearing and doing the actual budget presentation.
Well, this seems kind of hard to do without being part of seeing the overall budget. I mean, First, we gotta see what our budget is and what kind of, well, I guess I'll call it, discretionary money
These,
that we even
well,
have.
these are all additional, that's why I have on here how to fund them, because this would be up and over what we currently have.
Could we get like an unbalanced budget to start from? I mean, it would look really ugly, but you'd rather see.
Yep.
Yeah, we
all the
gotta know
stuff
where
so you
we're
can
at.
Plan for it too.
Well, and that's kind of why I wanted to know, like, these are like some of the main questions that are coming up and what we would like to kind of have a discussion on. And I know last year, we had a special meeting and we sat around and went line by line through the budget and asked the questions. You guys looked at it, kind of went through that. So that's kind of how do you want to handle this year's budget? What do you want to do? Are there certain items on this list that you say absolutely not? Are there certain items that you say absolutely yes? I can take those, and then again, we still can meet and go through. This is kind of a discussion, and, because I don't know how you guys want to approach the 25 budget.
Well, normally we approach it by initially seeing it back as early as August. Richard used to bring it to all the committees about August, and he went around the committees a few times and kept a log of what changes they made, either to delete or add something. And then it came to the board with the budget and then a separate list of these proposed changes that the committees made. They call it a change log. And to me, middle of October here, it seems like it's, we'll still get by, but we are a little late, I would say.
So I did talk with, I met with Clip, I've met with UC. We've had conversations on things, and kind of asking what they wanted to see, what things they would like to add, what they wanted to do. So again, some of those items are on here, some items are from staff of what they would like to see. So there's a bunch of different scenarios, and again, I can sit down and go through line by line. A lot of the things that I was waiting on was trying to determine on whether or not the debt was gonna go forward, because that changes the levy. There's a lot of different things, and I'm still waiting on some numbers from the state that I won't get for another few weeks. So I'm trying to
Well-
bring you guys something a little bit closer.
Well, to me, it just seems like we're shooting in the dark without having the rest of the budget.
And that's
As
why,
a
that's why I
reference.
said last year, I know we took a separate meeting. I
Well-
didn't wanna bring you guys the budget and go line by line through everything right now during a regular board meeting. So with having a conversation, it was, did you guys wanna answer some of these questions that we have sitting? Or would you guys like to schedule a different day to go over the budget and see everything and go line by line and have a open discussion on everything?
I mean, could we get a projection without these things and then with these things? Cause there might be other ways to finance stuff, like, said we're a little bit limited on what all we can do, fix the general fund deficit. But, I mean, there are some things I've personally looked at, it's a bit of a policy decision, right? I mean, but if we
can
have all of
send-
it in front of us, we can decide,
I can
if we're
send you
running a
guys
deficit without
everything.
any of these, we're probably in big trouble. And if
I can
we're
send you
not,
everything
then-
with everything in, because that's how I have it right now, and that's how I know that we are not balanced and that we need to have that conversation along with, one of the big questions on here is whether or not you guys want to kind of go through and start putting a contingency line in, which I do not have a dollar amount in, because I don't know what to do. What you guys would like to do for a contingency if you want to build your fund balance.
I mean, we should probably budget for a surplus, in my opinion, knowing there's gonna be unanticipated expenses that come up. But, I mean,
Well, it
think you
seems to-
start by looking at without any of this stuff, and then your worst case scenario, and you build off of that, like, okay, well, let's say we have a
Well,
$300,000 surplus without any of these, and with all these, then you have a $800,000 deficit, then we're probably not doing all these, right? But we might be able to do a few of these things, but
Well,
it's
and
hard to
that's-
it's hard to even start, like, I would agree with that.
But I mean,
statement.
kinda coming at this, some of the questions is, do you guys wanna allow any carryover from 24 to 25?
Well,
We already know where.
why wouldn't we?
Depends on if you want those assigned funds
We don't.
on the audit or not. You guys heard the 23 audit and, that's that assigned line.
Well, I think what Alex is saying, I think we agree that we need to see what you have for the big picture of the budget. So then
Yep.
we have some reference to even,
So my question is when would you like to, I can email it out, but that's not gonna help us. So when
Well,
do you
it-
wanna meet to actually go through the budget then?
well, I guess I'd like to see it well ahead of time to go
I
through
can
it
send it
first
out
and then,
tomorrow.
and then have, yeah, we definitely need
I
a
have it done.
separate meeting just for that.
I'm just waiting for,
'Cause
and we've been kinda talking, and Chris and I've been kinda talking about a special meeting just for the budget, things like that. And these were, the main questions is, the reevaluation of properties. It has to be done every 5 years, 25 would be technically the year that it's supposed to be done. But it's $250,000. So would you guys like it prepared in the, part of it in 25 budget, 26 budget? Has to be done by 27, those type of things, just to kind of give a little direction. I mean, if you guys absolutely say that, Clip and APC took no action on the railroad assessment, and the board wants to just take a vote and say, no, we're not doing the railroad assessment.
Well,
These
see-
are kind of the items that I was kind of hoping, even without,
well,
like,
if-
I understand like maybe the detective position, I understand maybe some of these, but there's some of them I don't know. But again, it's up to you guys. If you wanna see the budget and go through every one of these questions, I'm good with that.
Well, but that's why I was saying, if you get the one without any of this stuff in, then it gives you what wiggle room you have. And then if you have everything with it, then you know how much you can really spend. But then there might be some other financial maneuvers that could happen to bring some of them more into possibility. Of course, we have to be very, very careful with debt, because, we don't wanna recklessly play with that, but, I mean, as we know with our current general fund situation, if there's capital expenses, I know that was something I was looking at the police department is, every year, for example, we've been budgeting for one police car. We've been expensing it out of the general fund. On average, we've needed to replace 2 police cars, so then we've had effectively a shadow deficit of an extra patrol car every year, cause you have 8 patrol cars averaging 30,000 miles a year. So you basically got 4 years of life out of each car. You see where I'm going with that? Like, point is, I think like what trustee Charneski was saying, you gotta start out with both of those, and then we can kinda look at all of our options, at what all we can afford, what we can't afford. But it's hard to know.
I have it
knowing where we're
built
at.
in right now with everything, with all the numbers in, except for the contingency line. I would like to send that out. And then you guys can see how bad it is, and again, we can subtract off as the conversation goes. For me to go back through and spend the time to delete all the numbers out,
I mean,
it can, it's gonna take me some time.
obviously, we're not gonna be able to do all of these things, but, in the same year, right? But at the end of the day, if this helps us get on a plan, that's one of the biggest problems I've seen with our village, going back historically, is we've had no actual plan we've followed. With capital investments in our community and other budgetary things, we've kinda just gone year by year by the seat of our pants and just done stuff.
Well,
It's worked when we
actually,
had a huge surplus in the general fund balance,
And-
but
Previously, it probably kind of fell apart in about 2022. We used to have our budget, especially on the big items, carried out 5 years in advance. So there were, there was planning. And then at some point, I don't know if it's the previous treasurer or the one before him, that stuff just disappeared, and we were lucky to have the numbers we had at the time, and even those weren't reliable, and that kind of led to part of this situation in 2023, because the numbers that we had to work with to form that budget weren't accurate. So yeah, we got a lot of fixing to do, and I'm not real. There are some good items on this list that we really should do, but first off, we have to overcome the deficit, and like I asked the auditor, we have no money to fill in beyond what our actual revenues are that we take in, or the carryover, from this year. So we're going to have to overcome that, whatever it was last year, 400,000 or something, 200,000. Anyway, we have to overcome that, and then we also have to start rebuilding the what I call the reserve fund. If we don't have a reserve fund, I don't know how these credit rating places are going to view that. It might cost us 0.5 point of interest, or maybe more. I don't know.
Lisa, I have a question. This one's kind of alarming to me. Is that it would cost $84,000 to do a total reassessment of properties, but because we didn't have any permits for
Building permits.
Now it's going to cost $250,000 plus.
Correct, because they have to go back out and reassess each property.
Physically have to go look at it.
Did we used to have permits?
We had permits, and then my understanding is that they were stopped for at least garages.
Yeah. That was the village board that did that?
Yeah.
Okay.
And now,
April 26, 2022. From that point till, I think, March of 2024, we put it back in.
Well, who determined our records were not accurate?
they wouldn't be accurate because we don't have any building permits in between those years.
Well,
So
we
when-
must have
when
some
they're garage-
building information on dwellings.
We don't, because they didn't have to come in and get a permit.
No, that,
No, we do on dwellings, we just would not on
the
garages
garages.
and sheds and barns,
Yeah.
yeah.
okay.
So all that plays into how your taxes are done, because it's how much equity
And like,
you
wow.
have in those structures, so they would have to come back through and look at everybody's property to make sure that we are evaluating
Well, they also-
each resident
All
correctly.
those residents that built a detached garage didn't need a permit,
Correct,
so they improved the value of their home, but they didn't pay taxes on that value.
Correct. so in order to make it fair amongst all residents, we would have to have it.
So we lost that tax money, in addition to having to pay a lot more money to do the reassessment now. Just wanna point that out.
Well, we don't know for sure, because we don't know, for one thing, this building code change wasn't even posted for at least a year. I mean, people didn't know about it. And also, the administrator at the time was instead working with his nephew or whoever, with Will, to issue zoning permits instead of the building permits, because he wanted to keep track of this. So I don't know what you have for records for that.
That's
And so I'm gonna say if anybody, says there's all these buildings that went up that aren't accounted for, that's to a great extent speculation. And if you do know of places that, they put up you know, huge building, well, then it's not a secret anymore, if people know that.
I do recall a couple meetings ago, you had mentioned that former trustee Straub and yourself pushed removing these because you thought the building permits were too onerous and becoming like Wausau.
The building code, the whole code itself was, and all of these discussions, this was all open meetings at CLIP. We went through every single page, actually every word of the building code, and didn't seem to be much public input on it. There was no real argument on any of it. I mean, I forgot who was on the board at the time. It passed, and it was, like I say, it was over a year before it was even put on the website for people to see. And then after that, I know I had discussions with Dwayne about it. He told me they were getting zoning permits in place of the building permits on these, whatever structures they were, garages or whatever. They weren't houses, because any dwellings, it all still required building permits.
Yeah, that's what, I do remember Dwayne told me that too. He says because of the change requirements, he was still getting the zoning permits to make sure he could check them and then make sure everything.
But then that was
still
questioned because it says clearly no permits at all. And we use our UDC permit as our zoning permit. So anybody that call in and asked if they needed a permit, they were told they don't need a permit. And there was, I wanna say, a 6-month window where I did track that people were getting permits, zoning permits. But then, who knows when that started, and then when it, I can tell you when it ended, and that's maybe about a year and a half. Who knows when he actually put that into place? Was Dwayne here that whole time?
Well, I forgot when he was here,
Yeah.
from when to when, but yeah,
He
for
was
quite a
like, he
while.
was here like 18 months.
So it could be a lot, or it could be very little, but the fact is, you don't have that information, so that's why they have to do that.
A little bit more in depth of a
Yeah, the
assessment.
full Monty version of the assessment.
So who determines that they have to do the full Monty, us or them?
It'd be them.
Nick Lair told you that?
Yeah, that's what he said. I mean, I don't have the email, but it was brought to our attention that since we didn't have that, we weren't gonna pass muster with the $84,000 deal, we'd have to do the other one.
And when was that $250,000 quote? He says given 2023.
It's a quote back
What-
from 23.
Was that early 23, late 23?
I'd have to go back and look.
But it's probably gonna be more.
It'll probably be more depending on what year you decide to actually have the properties.
I mean, for the budget, could we get a updated estimate from them? I mean.
Sure.
I could crunch.
Cause
some
it could be,
numbers
I
to
mean,
get a
who
better
knows where
idea
it could
what
be,
that-
you know, 280,000, it could be 260,000, yeah, I don't know what that, but.
how
And
many could-
we also messed out,
Yeah, there's one, I mean, where it doesn't make sense. It
Yeah.
sounds like they're just calling the shots. It's like, I
Well,
don't see
right,
how that
and
makes sense.
it seems to be self-serving on their part, that says, yeah, you need to,
Well, and if,
well, you need to buy our
if the village
$250,000
believes that everything
thing
is
rather than our
accurate, all of our
$50,000.
records are accurate, then we could argue the 84. But to be honest, I mean, with Pete and I kind of going through and looking at things, the two of us can't say that what we have is 100% accurate. Because without those building permits being sent over to the assessor and looking through it,
That's another
I don't
question I
know.
could ask him, you know, at what point does it get sucked back into the system anyway? You know, with the $84,000, how much tax dollars are we losing, minus the ones that I'm aware of?
I would think very little.
Yeah.
There can't be that many.
Reported then, Pete?
Pardon me?
If you do the $84,000 one, then those structures that wouldn't have clean permits, would they still be reported in that assessment or not?
No, not till the next
Next round.
cycle.
well, again,
What do
you'd
you
still be
rent?
running into the same problem. if every 5 years until the assessor knows that that building or that structure was put in, they will never catch
But they
that.
catch it on their random,
Well, it would be the only time they never catch is when they go out and do the visual inspection.
Which would be the
Right,
250.
so if a guy built a two-car garage next to his house and you didn't see it on the aerial view, the assessor wouldn't catch it until he actually walked that property for whatever time period that is. I don't know how often they
Does
do,
it do a percentage of random ones every year then?
something.
that's, yeah, something like that. I should look into it more, just so you guys have more information.
Well, I mean, that seems more reasonable than this whole $250,000 thing. I mean, I cannot see us recouping that $250,000 on
I'd love to be
taxes.
able to blame it on you and straw, but I don't think I can.
Yeah, I know you can't. I'm too slick for
You
that.
sure are. Now, let me look in to see that process, because, you know, so we laid 2 years before it'd be put into the normal cycle, where they do a certain percentage.
Yeah.
What are we really gaining?
Yeah, because I know for sure Dwayne told me that. He goes, because I'm making sure with zoning permits that everything met the setbacks. So I know that those were done.
But if you had a garage that didn't require a zoning review, then they
But
just,
we said he would still do that.
Still do it?
He would still do it. That's what he
Yeah,
told
but
me.
then it literally stopped at some point. Maybe I'm the culprit for that, because it wasn't required. How could I make somebody get a permit when the ordinance clearly said you don't need a permit?
And is this, assessor, he's one of a number in the state, right? I mean, do we have to use this?
Are you talking about the assessor? We have kind of like the guy from Weston?
No,
He's- no,
no,
he's-
not the building
No,
inspector.
Not the building inspector, okay, yeah. 'Cause he-
No, this is just the assessor that the village
you know, the
uses.
guy that comes in every time we do the open book.
Okay, yeah, that guy, yeah.
That's the assessor.
Okay,
He's
okay.
not with Weston. He's
Okay,
his
I
own
thought he was from
business.
Weston,
He has his
okay.
own business.
Okay, because he mentioned, for that stuff, the average impact to assessed value in this area is $60 to $70 a square foot. If you do the math. I mean,
Is that for a house or a garage?
garage,
Okay.
for a garage. I mean, house would be a lot more,
Oh, yeah, I just
Yeah.
want to clarify.
but it adds up. I mean, someone puts up a 60 by 40 garage, that's $144,000 of assessed value. I mean, that's,
The other
Not
thing
small.
is if you do this, then you guys have a clean thing that, here's your starting point.
If we
Again,
had money.
this is things, well, and this is why you can put in the 25, you can do the 26, but it does need to be done by 27 the latest. So, yep. So it's something to kinda, it's more bringing it to your attention, cause technically, it would have been that we should be doing it in 25, just because that 5 year is up. It's something to kind of bring to the board's attention that, hey, this is something that should be done here in the next few years. How do you guys want to approach it? Because we can start to analyze how to put that into the budget. Do you put $100,000 on the side and then build that and carry it forward for another 100,000 and carry it forward? You know, do you divide it by 3 years? It's part of a budgeting strategically,
Yep, I think we got it.
so.
I think we'll probably have to have a
So do
special.
you guys wanna try to pick a date now for the budget meeting?
Probably a good time.
It's not on
I'd
the
have to
agenda,
check
'cause we
my
can't really do
Yeah,
schedule.
All right, well, somebody else send out a doodle poll.
Doodle poll, yeah.
The agenda, do it.
Poll. Okay.
All right, anything else for this item? Okay, we'll move on. Item 6O, resolution number 2024-17, approving an amended project plan for TID 2.
Motion to approve the consent agenda?
These are resolutions, can't be on the consent agenda.
Oh, shoot.
Yeah, what are those doing on the consent agenda?
I must have missed it, I didn't see them.
So the first one, your 2024-17, that was not the first one. This is just to kind of let you guys know that
So the JRB.
JRB approved this, so this is just kind of an FYI. Resolution.
Also,
that
we're
it-
not voting on it, that's not that we're voting on.
That, nope, this one doesn't need to be voted on, I asked Brian, he said you can if the board would like to, but he says that that's not a item.
All right, so this is information. Anybody have any questions on it? Nope. Great, all right, moving on to item P, resolution 2024-18.
Okay, so this one, is because the banks were closed today. This is a set sale, and it is kind of going through and just giving some parameters that it would not exceed, let me verify, 4.75%. So Ellers would go to bid tomorrow, and it would state that we would not exceed 4.75%. If it came in over that, we could deny it. This is just kind of setting the limitations and everything would be okay, and then as long as Ellers comes back, whatever the lowest bid would be, I could sign the paperwork so that we could proceed forward with getting the funds.
Anybody have any questions? No. I'll make a motion we approve resolution 2024-18.
Second.
I made a motion, Alex made a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, call the roll, please.
Alex Vedvik,
Yes.
Chris Iden,
Yes.
Aaron Mishka,
Yes.
Ken Charneski,
No.
Chris Bowl,
Yes.
I talked to Bert.
Motion carried, 4-1. So there you go, Lisa.
Thank you.
Hopefully they come in at some favorable rates. All right, item number Q, I guess that was the last consent agenda item. We don't have, there aren't any minutes in the,
Yeah, there's no minutes, no board minutes in here.
nope. All right, item Q, proposed 2025 village events.
I make a motion to approve 2025 village events.
I'll second. Chris made a motion, Chris made a second to approve the 2025 village events as presented. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion carried. All right, moving on, two minutes. Item number 8, previous meeting minutes from Clip. Any questions, comments? Thank them for their minutes. Item U, September 17th, ambulance subcommittee minutes. Questions or comments?
Yeah, I see, September 17th, public comment, Bernie Kramer. It says his information has been added to the minutes, but I don't see him in the minutes here.
I think it was added to the packet.
Okay.
Jen was a clerk, but I would check with her. Probably on that one. So I know we've added some information, he's brought 2 packets, but I guess it'd be good to clarify.
We summarized it after the parentheses.
Anything else on U?
Okay, what are we doing? Are we accepting them, or are we,
Well, you
going
don't-
to include
You
those?
don't accept these, you just
Thank them.
made a comment, and they'll check it, and we
Oh,
thank them for
okay.
the.
So when she puts it online, she'll add the minutes. So she hasn't put it online yet until the minutes are approved.
So you'll add whatever Bernie had provided?
Correct.
Yeah, okay, good.
All right, item V, September 11th, joint review board minutes. Questions, comments? Thank them for their minutes. Item W, October 8th, joint review board meeting minutes. Questions or comments? Sorry, thank them for their minutes. Item number 9, consideration of motion to convene a closed session pursuant to West 1951E for deliberating or negotiating the purchase of public properties and municipal funds, or adopting the other specified public business, whereas related or bargaining reasons require closed session, to a later agreement with the Teamsters Union Local 662, and pursuant to West 1951E for deliberating or negotiating the purchase of public property, investing public funds, or conducting other specified public business, whenever committed or bargaining Reasons require closed session, to it labor agreement with the Wisconsin Professional Police Association.
I move into closed session.
Second.
Who seconded it?
Alex made a motion, Chris made a second to convene in the closed session. We'll ask Lisa to stick around, and Bobby. Any further discussion? Hearing none, call the roll, please.
Alex Medvick?
Yes.
Chris Iden?
Yes.
Aaron Mishka?
Yes.
Ken Cherneski?
Yes.
Chris Vol?
Yes. Motion carried, 5-0, we're in closed session. Anybody need to go to the bathroom? No? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carried. Item number Y, labor agreement with the WPPA, I make a motion to continue negotiations. I made a motion, Chris made a second, to continue negotiations. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carried. Items for future agendas. Anyone?
Are we currently looking at like our permit costs? Because I believe there's an equipment.
I thought somebody was bringing that up. Wasn't Greg? Oh, Greg's bringing that to APC.
APC, and that is for,
That's for
like, yeah.
That's for right away.
Oh, was that something from Clip?
Yeah, well, he talked about it, Cliff, because the thing is the utilities come in, they gotta pay a right away charge.
Right.
But they wreck roads and stuff, so he
Yeah.
wants to jack it up to start paying for that.
But you're talking about other permits?
Yeah, can Greg look at surrounding communities to see if they're comparable?
Yeah.
Not that we're
Yeah, that could be certainly a,
you were
staff
He
deal.
mentioned some big project where it's usually like a $13,000.
That's the right of way.
Yeah, okay. You know, and he said there's other things like that too. Just make sure we're comparable.
Sure, I'll talk about that too with them at the APC meeting.
And a couple months ago, we discussed looking at the cost of different law legal representation. Did we ever look at different costs?
That never actually, it was brought up a couple times, but never actually ever got put on an agenda. Because every time it was brought up, there was, whoever brought it up didn't put it on the agenda.
Agenda item you want?
Yeah, I mean, we could put it on there. I don't know what, if we can shop around for something like that, if we can do better, I don't know.
Do you want like an RFP?
You'd almost have to.
Yeah.
Okay, what's he exactly asking for?
RFP for village attorney.
RFP, village attorney, got it. Thank you.
Anything else?
I'll think of it when I get home.
All right. You can text Iden. All right, item number 13, I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Was that you?
Yep.
Chris? I made a motion, Chris made a second to adjourn. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? We're adjourned. Thanks, everyone.
You got some, what's out there.